Good afternoon, everyone. We're just getting the meeting started here, and we'll call to order when the chair and the rest of the committee is here, closer to 1:30. We are streaming and live. Good afternoon, Council.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Hawkins. We are live and streaming. We're just getting everyone admitted here. And when we call the meeting to order, I will admit the presenters for the first item.
Terrific.
So Ryan, is there no way we could have this meeting outside and enjoy the weather?
We could open up some windows.
Yeah, I don't think that.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, Greg, how are you? How are everyone?
Good, how are you?
Great, thanks. What a beautiful day out there today, eh?
I know. Can we do this one from the park, this meeting?
Oh, exactly.
Nice.
It's amazing out there.
I know, March, it is awesome.
Hello, Councilor Carol.
Howdy.
Robbie?
Howdy.
Should be on a deck somewhere, Rob.
Yes. Are we being recorded?
Yes.
Yes, we are already.
Are we live?
We are.
Oh, okay. I'll talk to you later then, Greg.
I think the whole city should be on a deck somewhere. How about that?
It's been beautiful out there.
Yes.
All right. Since we're doing the River Valley first, I needed to choose a River Valley picture for the first presentation. I'll be changing my pictures throughout to reflect the presentation.
Is that snow in the
Good.
River Valley?
Good for you, Chair.
No, that's just the river. It's a huge picture of the river.
Oh, it looks white from my angle here.
Yeah, very old photograph. Of course. Wait till you see the transit when I pick for later in the presentation.
You need more things to do, I think.
Mr. Westerson, are we ready to begin? I will ignore my call.
Yes, we are, Chair.
All right, I'm going to call us to order and we will get going. So I'm going to begin with the acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot Canadian Plains, pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta region. So just because SPCs are still relatively new and we have a lot of people joining us for today, just want to let you know a little bit about what SPCs are. This is a little bit less formal than a council meeting. And think of this as an opportunity for a conversation between the councillors who are here as part of the committee, the administration who is here, and members of the public. Just so everybody knows, this is streaming, so everything we are saying is going out. And while we will be following the rules of the procedure bylaw, we're always a little bit less formal at an SPC. So I'm going to ask Mr. Westerson to do a roll call of the SPC members and anyone else who we need to know is in the meeting. Mr. Westerson.
Madam Chair, can you ask everybody that's not speaking to mute their mics, please?
Oh, yes, please. It does make the sound a little better. Mr. Westerson, we're turning over to you right now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the roll call, Councillor Kaufman,
Present.
Councillor Parker,
Here.
Deputy Mayor Miyashiro,
Here.
and Councillor Croson.
Present, thank you.
Excellent. All members of the committee are present and accounted for. In the room are myself and Ms. Moncrief as well.
All right. Thank you very much. So we have next is our adoption of the agenda. We have 6 presentations on the agenda. I'll just remind everyone who's presenting that we are going till 4:30, so we have 3 hours to get through. I don't think there's any additions or deletions. Can I have a motion to adopt just by consensus? Are my colleagues okay with the agenda? Okay. We then have our consent agenda, which has our minutes from our last meeting of February 4th, 2021, and the status of initiatives, what we are working on. Can I get a consensus motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Kaufman.
Excellent. So we jump then into presentations. We have the River Valley Public Engagement Report, which is being brought forward by Mr. Ellis. And then we have several presenters. Mr. Ellis or Mr. Hawkins, do you want to introduce or do you want to jump right into Mr. Witkowski?
We can go straight to the.
Yeah, sorry, David.
I was just going to say we can go straight to the presentation, and I'll introduce Chris Witkowski as our Parks Planning Manager, who conducted the public engagement process and here to report today.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members for having us today. My name is Chris Witkowski. I'm the Parks Planning Manager. I'm also very happy to announce that I'm here today with Cheryl Arelis, Jim Carter, Dean Johnson, Aaron Domes, and Stuart Rood, 5 of the stakeholders who worked with us throughout this project. They have all generously volunteered their time to be here today. I know they all have some information that they would like to share with you. So I'm not sure how the chairperson would like to coordinate their involvement, but I think what I'd like to do is run through the project background, and then I'll turn it over to the chair and then decide how we engage the other stakeholders, if that's okay.
That sounds fine, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Next slide, please. So this project came about, I think, as we all recall, through the Pathway 24 debate from last spring. For those who weren't here, Pathway 24 was about a 3-kilometer pathway that was proposed to run through the 6 Mile Coulee region of the River Valley. There was quite a bit of debate on that, some opposition. I'm not going to rehash all that. I think it's pretty clear in our mind. But out of that was a request from City Council for us to re-engage with the community and the stakeholders and to start discussing use in the River Valley again. So as we took this project away, or as we took that resolution away and started thinking about what this project looks like, there were definitely some outlines from the council resolution, some asks of City Council for us to look at. We really wanted to maximize the value of going out and engaging potentially 100,000 residents, and what can we get out of this project? We really thought about what is the balance between recreation and preservation in the River Valley. And as I personally started to think about this project and think about conversations I had with residents before this project, thinking about the Pathway 24 debate, I kind of did a quick little visioning exercise, and I'm going to ask the committee to do the same thing. It's only going to take 30 seconds, so it'll be very quick. But I think it sets the context for where we're trying to go with the River Valley. So I'm going to ask you to think of 2 visions in your head. First one is if the River Valley is 100% recreation, and that could be whatever that is in your head. It could be trails, ski slopes, ice rinks, whatever that is in your head, 100% recreation. On the other hand, I want you to think of the River Valley as 100% preservation. Again, whatever that is to you, grasslands, forests, lions, tigers, dinosaurs, whatever. It's your vision. So we have the two extremes there. We're not advocating to achieve either extreme. We haven't heard from any stakeholder advocating to achieve either extreme. However, everyone's vision is different when you factor in those two extremes. So everyone's kind of vision of what that balance point between those two extremes is different. So for us to try to be able to find that balance point, we really had to establish what are the commonalities of the majority of our residents where we can find that nice balance point between those two extremes where everybody goes into that river valley and feels pretty content and happy with what they see in there. So that was the goal of this project. How do we get there? We did it through 4 different steps, which are on the screen, and I'm going to describe each one in a little bit more detail here in just a few minutes. Do you want to highlight 2 key partners on the project? RC Strategies. They helped us with the first 3 steps along the way, and then the second is Aero Archaeology, who's working with us on the Indigenous engagement and historical analysis. Next slide, please. Do we have the slide for the stakeholder group discussion sessions? It's not showing up on my screen. I don't know if it's on the...
Just a moment there, Mr. Butowski. We'll look at it. Oh,
Sure.
There we go.
Okay. So the first step we had was doing stakeholder meetings. We had 11 different stakeholder groups that we met with. We identified individuals who had, they weren't organizations. Some were from organizations, some were just from different interest groups. We found 11 different groups. We had 66 individuals through those groups. And we met with them individually just to talk about their values, their vision, what their fundamental beliefs for the river valley. Once we kind of had that established, we met with those 11 groups. We reconvened as a larger group, kind of reported back on what we heard, and we're able to kind of work through, again, some fundamental statements, finding those commonalities across all the groups. And we did that from September through November of 2020. Next slide, please. These are the stakeholder groups that we met with. I'm not going to read all 11 out to you, but I just want to note that all 5 of the individuals who are here with me today were representatives of these groups. And once again, I'd like to thank them for their participation in the project and for their involvement today. Next slide, please. We also did a public survey. We had to re-strategize how we were going to do public engagement. Obviously, 2020 was a very different year for everybody. We didn't have the option to, host community forums or big open houses like we've done in the past. So we had to rethink how we were going to engage. We didn't want the whole involvement to be around these 66 individuals. For as great as their input was, it's 100,000 residents in this community. We had to engage all of them, or as many as we could. So we went to a household survey. Every household in the city received a postcard with a unique access code on it. That was linked to a survey on the Get Involved Lethbridge webpage, where residents could go in and fill out the community survey. We sent out 40,000 postcards. We received just over 3,000 responses. I am not an expert in survey administration, but from what I hear, that is an excellent turnout. So I'm very pleased with that. And also, it really shows the dedication to our river valley from our residents. Also, as a side note, if any resident wanted a hard copy of the survey, they had the option to request that. And I think we had 50 or 60 requests for hard copy surveys as well. Next slide, please. Third tool was some online mapping. This was through the Get Involved webpage. We had an online map of the city. Residents could go in. You didn't need any access code. It was open to any member of the public. Could go in. You could pin a digital pin onto any area of the city. And then you can make a comment about concern and upgrade, whatever people want to talk about on there. And in total, we had about 160 comments through the online mapping tool. Next page, next slide. When we were doing the stakeholder sessions, we met with the Reconciliation Lethbridge Advisory Committee and the Historic Places Advisory Committee. And although those were very good and informative sessions, we realized that a 90-minute session with those groups just wasn't quite adequate. we needed to get a little more information. So that was where we engaged Aero Archaeology, and they are working with us right now on doing engagement with some Blackfoot elders and also doing a historical analysis of some Euro-Canadian sites. The original goal was to have the report in time for this meeting or very close to this time frame. However, COVID has put a little bit of a delay on that. There has been some health and safety protocols implemented amongst the elders, and we certainly want to respect everyone's health and safety through this process. So right now the report is looking like it'll be done in May. Once again, I'd rather take the 2 months and consider everyone's safety and get a complete report than try to rush and jeopardize people's safety and get incomplete information just to meet today's deadline. What I can share with you quickly, I did get an update yesterday from Aero Archaeology. We have identified, or they have identified, 82 cultural sites by the First Nations that are recorded in our river valley within the city limits. 30 of them no longer exist, and those are for varying reasons. And then there are also 26 Euro-Canadian sites, 5 of which no longer exist. As this project progresses, there will be field assessments of all these sites, and there will be a report that will come out that will show where the sites are and maybe some of the protection measures that are required for each of those. So still a little bit more work to do on this end. Next slide, please. So some of the key findings for this is really where I want to spend a good chunk of the presentation. These are the commonalities that I was talking about before. This is where we're really going to start to try to build conversations moving forward. The first bullet really probably comes as no surprise. Residents highly value the river valley. I don't think I have to explain that. We have such a unique asset in this community. It's great to have, and obviously so many residents value what we have down there. River valley should be accessible to all. This one we have to clarify a little bit because it was misconstrued sometimes. What this means is that every resident should have access to the river valley. It should not be an exclusive zone accessible only to a chosen few. Every resident, every visitor should have access to the river valley. What this does not mean is that every recreational activity will have access to the river valley. It does not get to that first vision that I was talking about. There's just some activities that simply cannot occur in the river valley. So access for all, community access, not necessarily recreation access. Concerns about degradation of the river valley. This was a big one too. We really heard this across multiple platforms through every stakeholder session. No matter what side of that spectrum you're on, towards recreation or to preservation, we heard that people were concerned about the degradation of the river valley. Right now, we have a reality that we have some pockets of dedicated use in the river valley. We have some developed parks, but largely our river valley is a bit of a free-for-all right now. And as new activities take place, we're starting to see some degradation. Once a new activity goes into a new area and starts to erode the grasslands, those grasses don't come back. Once it compacts the soil, the erosion starts to begin, and that erosion just compounds. As we probably a lot of times inadvertently go through traditional sites or disrupt artifacts, those are gone. They don't ever come back. So we really have to think about the degradation and really keeping the river valley intact for the future, for future generations. Next one, decision-making framework. What happens in the river valley is not the city's decision alone. We have a lot of community partners. I have 5 of them here with me today. Like I said, we didn't pay them to come here. I didn't buy them donuts to come here. They're here because they are very passionate about the river valley. And maybe I do owe them donuts afterwards. I don't know. I'm getting a lot of thumbs up here. So, okay, maybe I shouldn't have said that. But no, it's great to have them here. We have 5 partners right here. We have many partners involved in this project. So just keeping that conversation going and understanding this is a collaborative decision. It's not just on the city's shoulders alone. Signage and education, again, another very consistent message that we heard. There is some signage in the River Valley, but we do have to kind of increase that. We have to put in some wayfinding signage. We need to put in some educational signage, enforcement. It's not to say we want this to become the Las Vegas Strip where there's just signs everywhere, but we do have to increase some of the information that we're providing down in the River Valley. Those are kind of the 5 key commonalities. There's a lot of information that we received through this project. A lot of it's in the report that was submitted with this package. But these are the 5 key things that we heard. Consistent messaging across the board. Next slide, please. And this is my last one, and then I'll turn it over back to the committee and allow the stakeholders some time. What are the next steps that we want to do here? This is really kind of a bit of a repeat from the last slide, but kind of where we're going to go forward. Fortunately, what we saw, a lot of what we heard was in alignment with the River Valley Parks Master Plan from 2017. There wasn't a lot in there that strayed from that report. And so one of the key things is to establish a River Valley use network. And that is, it kind of goes back to those first visions I talked about. It's about finding that balance between the 2 extremes. It's about establishing a trail network so that we're not having rogue trails all over and we're starting to increase that degradation. But it's also identifying areas for preservation where we're just not going to have recreational activities. You know, protecting natural vegetation and wildlife, historic cultural sites. We have to be very cognizant of that too. How are we going to do this? We want to establish a community advisory group. I don't know if that's the official term, but some sort of community group. We have built great momentum through this engagement project. At least I feel that we've built some great momentum. We have some great contacts. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I have 5 of them here today. Great contacts. They have all been so involved in this project. Let's keep the momentum going. Let's keep the train running. Let's keep these conversations. And it goes back to the partnership that I talked about, decision making. We have a real opportunity here to get the community involved and start to focus on some actions in the River Valley. And then lastly, signage and education. Again, I touched on it on the last slide. The one point I didn't mention was rescue and emergency services. When we did meet with them, they were in favor of some signage as well. It's very hard for them if somebody gets hurt. Right now, there aren't a lot of waypoints for someone to inform emergency services where they are in the River Valley. So having some wayfinding will help with that. Most likely, signage and education will come after we have the discussion about the River Valley Use Network. I think it's very beneficial to know what we're doing and where we're going before we start to sign it all. So that's the very broad overview. I want to keep it a little bit shorter because I want to give the other 5 a chance to speak. So I'll turn it back over to the committee chair and leave it in your capable hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yes, you do have written submissions from your various presenters. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything. The committee and the members of the public had a chance to read them online. I am going to go reverse order. Mr. Rood, is there anything you wish to add to your written submission?
Sure, if I can have a minute and a half here.
That's about.
What was that?
I said that's about it. A minute and a half.
Great, thank you. I firstly want to thank Chris and the Parks crew for this excellent initiative. Very timely, very important, and also the council members for your attention today and everyone else who's contributing. So we regard the Old Man River as the greatest natural asset in Lethbridge. I mean, that's why the city's here. And sometimes I think it's been a bit neglected relative to particularly recreation. This task really focused on river trails, walking trails, river valley trails, but I know that a number of contributions recognize the importance of the river use as well as we did, and that was our focus. I also say that the River Valley Master Plan did a really excellent job of recognizing the issues and opportunities relative to the River Valley recreation. We think there are 3 areas for action or opportunity. Communication's one, and Chris already chatted about that. People need to know or should know where to put in, where to take out. And the question we get asked most often is, how long is it going to take? We should provide this information. Access is an issue. It'd be nice to have a sequence of about a half dozen really good access points, easy to get a boat in or out and get people in and out. And the biggest challenge is the last access, which is Pavan Park. There used to be an excellent boat ramp there with a paved loop. Unfortunately, with the erosion of the bank, we lost that. And we really need that because that's the end. If people go past that, it's a long way to the next bridge. The third element is the weir. And we need the weir. It gives us a small reservoir for the city water supply, but it interrupts the corridor. And it's a mystery to most people. They don't know what it is, where it is, or how to deal with it. The city did put in a portage trail. It's way too long. No one uses it. There was an excellent bypass channel until a decade ago. The city put a berm over top of that with culverts below it. And that was sensible. This is to skim off possible contaminants if there was a spill on Scenic Drive. But since that has been choked off, we no longer have a way to safely get around the weir. We'd like to see something. And it's not only a question of getting over the weir, but there's an opportunity there. By having that vertical drop, we can actually produce a pretty interesting feature. And these are very, very popular in Boise, Idaho, and Bend, Oregon, and Missoula, and the like. So we look at it not as a hazard, but as an asset. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. If I go backwards, that would go to Mr. Johnson from Trail Runner.
Hi there. Yeah, so I'm also involved with the Lethbridge Lasso Ultra. So it's an event that happens in the fall. And so we bring people in from out of town, and people come into town to do a lot of training on it. I was just contacted by Visit Lethbridge yesterday, Shilpa Stalker, and she was asking if there was anything that the Lodging Association could do to help encourage trail use and or for their patrons that come into town. And so she was asking if we already had signage and routes. And I said, well, not at this time. So our goal is really to get stewardship of the trails and also to bring up the maturity level of our trail system, similar to like what you might see in Fernie, Kimberley, Medicine Hat. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Jones, representing Lethbridge Trails Alliance.
Okay, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. Just a few points of clarity here, and just to clarify who we are. So the Lethbridge Trail Alliance is a new organization. We are a representative group of diverse trail users with a unified voice dedicated to single-track trail advocacy and stewardship. The LTA formed on Facebook during the Pathway 24 debate, and we have almost 550 members on our Facebook group. These people come from various trail advocacy backgrounds. So we've got retail store owners, event organizers, environmental groups, recreation and conservation specialists, and essentially people who love to recreate and connect to nature in the river valley. And as I think we've all experienced during the pandemic, you know, the value of time outdoors in nature, doing the activities we love, is priceless, especially for our mental and physical health. Also, like Dean said, you know, we've also been contacted by the Lethbridge tourism community and in particular, or the Lodging Association, who have an interest in promoting coulee trails for tourism. And that's something that's a proven success story in many other communities. And in particular, it is the attractive single track trail experience that users are looking for. We recognize that our fragmented approach in the past to approaching the city on trail issues has been a challenge. So we've taken your advice, and we have now submitted paperwork to register ourselves, to register LTA as a not-for-profit association, and hoping to become your single point of contact for single track trail stewardship in Lethbridge. There's just 3 quick points here just to clarify. So like I said, our core interest is single track trail stewardship, which we know are an unrealized asset in the city. Currently, the single track trails are almost entirely ignored in the River Valley Master Plan, and this is a major gap given the potential benefits. Secondly, almost all current single track trails are unsanctioned in the city, so they're not recorded and maintained, and like I said, essentially unknown. They're also technically illegal for bikes. And in the engagement that was just completed, I believe the percentage was around 39% of city respondents claimed to use them to ride bikes. So, you know, we've got some illegal activity happening, and this situation we feel should be rectified immediately by permitting bikes on the sustainable trails in our city. We also look forward to taking part in the planning and development process, determine what is and is not appropriate in what locations, as well as essentially helping or eventually helping to maintain the trails. And then finally, the issue of rogue trail building is a concern of everybody's, I think. And I think one of the ways we can help solve that issue is by channeling people's independent efforts into helping to maintain designated trails, as well as building new ones that have been approved. You know, and one easy way of eliminating a lot of the rogue trails is by designating them as actual trails, and they'll be legitimized. Essentially, bottom line, we look forward to working with the city to develop our 2021 operational plan, as well as a budget request that will enable us to start up our organization and commit volunteer time to maintaining our trails this season, because as we all know, especially on a day like today, spring is fast approaching. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carter, if you have anything you want to add to your written submission.
Yes, if I could, yes. Thank you again for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. Just quickly, I come into this issue as a fairly new resident of Lethbridge. My wife and I moved here about 3 years ago, and I'm an avid trail runner, conservationist, and we moved actually from Ottawa. But the first, I certainly know Dean Johnson and the trail running crew in Lethbridge very well. In fact, I think the first weekend that we lived here or moved here, we joined up with Dean and the trail runners to get a feel of the river valley, and I quickly saw that this is truly a gem for Lethbridge. It's something that can attract people from all over. But I think first and foremost, something I learned from living in Ottawa and enjoying the Gatineau Park, which is just north of Ottawa, is that I think we need to take a much directed conservation first approach to the future development of this very, very fragile, small piece of real estate that we have in the River Valley, the Old Man River Valley. We must, first and foremost, I think, take care of the habitat, and whether it's all the flora and fauna. And I think we can, if we do it in the right way, if we take the sort of the conservation approach first, we can build all the other recreational infrastructure and trails and all that sort of thing around it. As was said by Dean and some other people here this afternoon, we certainly need to develop official structured trails and get away from the informalness of what we have right now. But I think Gatineau Park in Quebec had a lot of the same problems, and maybe on a higher platform of people that wanted to develop residential areas on the periphery of the park, a growing number of users of the park, whether it was skiers or trail runners or whatever. So there was a growing pressures on the park, and I see in this particular area with the Old Man River Valley, we have the same types of pressures building over time. We do already have a lot of infrastructure, whether it's corporate or municipal in the valley, have a lot of sports infrastructure, recreation infrastructure. And I think we first and foremost must be cognizant of the need to protect the fragile ecosystem that we have in the valley. I'm not an expert, but I know as a volunteer with the Helen Schuler Nature Center, I've grown to understand a lot of the pressures on this area. And it would certainly be, I think, advantageous to take a similar route that Gatineau Park has done and create a fuller and larger nature reserve, and still have the opportunity for respectful recreation. The two can be done at the same time, but they have to be done professionally and formally. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Arelis, I left you to the end because I understand you also have a PowerPoint you'd like to do as part of your your mic is off.
Sorry about that. I wasn't sure if you guys had an opportunity to review it online.
I don't believe it. I'll just ask my colleagues, are you okay with a quick PowerPoint? I think it's only 6 slides.
Oh, absolutely.
It was a little bit more, but I'll try to just it's there for the viewing, and it is probably going to take more than 5 minutes, so I can I can just go to a couple of high points on each page just to summarize it a little bit, if that's okay.
That would be great. And we can ask Mr. Westerson to send it out to us so that we have it also to look at in depth later.
Yeah, because I wasn't sure the format, so I put everything on the slides, so there's a lot of information, but just to summarize, I can quickly go through that. But mostly it's the background that I was born in Lethbridge, and I've lived on the west side here for 40 years, whatever, and I'm an avid walker, and I have witnessed a lot of changes over the years. And as my background in range management and wildlife productivity, I see it with a little bit different eye from a lot of the casual users. I can assess things as they progress, and I've had concerns for a number of years. We're losing our grasslands at an alarming rate, and due to increased agriculture and urbanization, and it's now considered to be an endangered ecosystem. And we're surprisingly biodiverse, and I don't think I realized it when I was growing up, how incredibly biodiverse the native grasslands are. But they're really at risk right now because there's a loss of, there's so much erosion, loss of wildlife and microclimate change due to the loss of the native grasslands, and that's a critical carbon sink for us. So it has greater implications than just our local area. Now, that was kind of a topic when I first moved back to Lethbridge in the mid-'80s. Prior councils and administration had made arrangements to purchase the bulk of the River Valley lands because there was quite an emphasis on preserving and preservation at the time. And I recall that dune buggies used to go up and down the slopes, motorcycles, it was really a free-for-all. And it was starting to be recognized how valuable they were, the coulees were. And all that was banned. And when we moved over onto the west side here, there were the entrances to the Bull Trail Park. There were chains to prevent bikes. There's signs, they still are there, saying no bikes allowed, dogs on leash. And it was a pedestrian only pathway. And over the years, the designation of that pathway has changed and the chains were dropped. I believe originally it was because parents were pushing their kids with their strollers through and couldn't access the trails. And eventually that has all, become more and more open. And now people totally ignore all the signs they have for the last 5-8 years or so, to the point where we see truckloads of people unloading their mountain bikes and everything right in front of the sign and venturing forth. And so that is a major concern because I've witnessed the damage that has been done. The pathways that used to be maintained, they were walking pathways, but they were still able to retain the root structure. Oh, I forgot. Sorry, I didn't say next. I'm not used to doing it online like this. I apologize. So we're basically onto the going on to the fourth slide. Yeah. So I apologize for that. This is my first time doing this online, so forgive me. So I've seen a lot of degradation of the natural grasses, and in the next slide you'll see why natural grasses, the native grasses here, are so critical to preserve from whatever source the degradation is coming from. You see on the left of the slide is the native grasses. They're well adapted to the harsh climates. They live in extreme conditions and they survive year after year because of this massive root structure. They retain moisture, they act as a sponge, they retain soil moisture, they provide a lot of carbon when the tops die off, the carbon goes back into the soils, it enriches the soils, and the cycle perpetuates. It provides refuge for invertebrates, vertebrates, shelter for mammals, birds, a lot of breeding grounds for birds. That has been, a lot of it has been severely damaged with the increased traffic and notably with the increase in mountain biking off trail. And that has me concerned a lot because it is a lot of the wildlife is depending on that for their survival. We have endangered species living here that need the native grass cover to reproduce. It's been demonstrated that they won't reproduce anywhere else. And if you can plant it with agricultural grasses, they don't reproduce there. They need this actual undisturbed native grasses. So next slide. It is critical to preserve this for maintaining the wildlife habitat. And the wildlife corridors, they must be maintained. It was noted that a lot of the biking trails have been, they went on deer trails from before. I've seen that in other presentations. And I'm like, well, if you're there, where do you think the deer are going to go? Like, that's where the deer go. And they're being disturbed. They can't get adequate food down there. They're coming into the neighborhoods. So that is a concern I also have. Next slide. We really have to recognize that the River Valley is unique and irreplaceable. It's not, you can't compare it to any other areas of the world because we have a unique situation with how the coulees formed, our soil types, our climate type, just the type of animals. We have unique species that don't exist anywhere else. They're endangered here. We need to look at each factor individually when we're doing future planning. I'm not sure we have all the information available to do so when we're doing the planning. And I've seen a lot of negative repercussions from the human footprint out there. The things you can see the evidence from years ago. I'd mentioned earlier about the dune buggies. You can still see the trails years later, and also that there was a group that went down to Fort Benson and followed it up to Fort Whoop-Up. You can still see the tracks from 150 years ago. So we don't recover well. So we really have to be careful that whatever we do allow in the coulees, it's permanent and it's hard to recover. So
I'm just sorry to interrupt. Just going to ask you to wrap it up.
Yep, I'm on my last slide here. I'm sorry, I kind of, so yep, we can go to the end, and I just would ask that we keep the nature and natural, keep it as natural as possible. I'm not against biking. I just want it to be done in an appropriate location.
Thank you all. The passion you all have for the River Valley is certainly obvious in your presentations and in the information you presented. I'm just going to throw up the historical background. Up until the 60s, the River Valley was seen as a wasteland. All of our buildings were actually built so their backs were towards the River Valley, and it was the more impoverished people who lived in the River Valley, and it was actually our dumps. We threw a lot of our garbage into the River Valley. So it's fascinating how it has changed and how it has become central to the identity of Lethbridge today. And of course, it's vital that we keep it. Now, at this point, I just want to remind my colleagues that this is being brought forward to us for information. So there is no decision that we have to make, but I do know that several of you have questions, and Councillor Parker had his hand up way before everybody else. I'm assuming Councillor Parker is for a question.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate everyone's presentation, and thank you, Chris, for leading it. And I'm glad that we did send this back to the drawing board back last spring. I personally actually went for a walk with Miss Arelis. I think it was in fall of 2019, and she gave me a firsthand account of what she was seeing out there, and she's kind of kept me abreast over the months, not so much lately, but in regards to what's happening there. And then on the other side of the spectrum, I hear from the people who are using it, mountain bike users who are competitive leisure. And so there's this kind of conflict. And Chris, and I'm guessing, Chris, this committee is kind of trying to find the compromise. Am I correct?
Yes. I don't know if compromise is the word I'd want to use, but yes, the committee would be to get a lot of hopefully a lot of the same individuals who spoke today, and certainly the individuals that we spoke with throughout these sessions, because we heard a lot of similar comments, understanding that cycling and running is happening, that there is a place for those activities in the river valley. Also understanding that there are places in the river valley where those activities should not be occurring, or any other recreational activity. The understanding of the unique asset that we have and the need to preserve some of those spaces. So yes, the goal would be to bring this group together, bring all these groups together to help plan what the river valley looks like, and where people can recreate and where we should leave it alone.
Thank you. And my last question for right now, if I may, we use the term single-use trail. And what exactly does that mean? Single use. Can you explain that? Just what's the definition of that?
I'll give you my quick definition, and I'm going to ask Aaron to comment from the biking side. From the city side, we have distinguished between a pathway and a trail, and that was distinguished on the survey as well. A pathway is more of an artificial surface, a pavement, a shale, limestone. I mean, those aren't truly artificial, but it's a constructed, developed pathway that has some sort of surface on it. A trail is a single track, a natural ground trail that's used more for the cycling and the running. So that is kind of the definition from the city side. I will ask Aaron to maybe explain from the cycling side what single track is.
Sure. And I mean, I don't have I'm not armed with the definition here, but so one of the organizations that is very credible on this is the International Mountain Biking Association. And they do obviously come from that mountain biking perspective, but they've come to represent single track, and in particular, sustainable single track, to represent a variety of users, so hikers, trail runners, et cetera. And so their definition of single track is essentially one where users must travel in a single file format. So they're not wide, they're narrow. And Cheryl's right, you know, a lot of them, especially the naturally evolved ones, do start sometimes with a game trail. And they don't tend to get much wider than that either, except in areas where I suppose erosion has become a problem. They are almost always on a natural surface, although in some cases, land managers will put in a trail mix to help deal with erosion and water drainage. But if you're thinking about the Lethbridge River Valley, you've seen them all. You've seen our asphalt trails, you've seen the granular limestone or shale pathways, and then it's those narrow natural surface trails that often stem from those that are considered single track, suitable for biking, suitable for walking, hiking, running, family saunters. In the presentation that we provided, there are a couple of images on the slides, and there's a couple of examples of those. So one from up high in the 6 Mile area, and another narrow trail that I think shows a family walking along it. My family, actually, which is also down near the college. So now I mentioned sustainable single track too. So the key to that is managing water, essentially. So trying to ensure that water drains off of these trails and doesn't pool and collect on them. And that's really, I think, one of the best ways to properly design single track so that it is sustainable over the long term, which basically means once they're properly designed and built, there's low maintenance costs. Very, very little intervention is needed in order to manage them into the long term. And the very little that is needed can often be done by volunteers with hand tools. So they're inexpensive once they're in place.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Deputy Mayor Cheryl.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for your participation in this exercise. I live on the coulees on the north side, and I'm in the coulees several times a week. In the summertime, I'm usually in the coulees every day, walking my dogs, and I see the value of both sides and having some balance. The activities that go on in what we're calling in the 6 Mile coulee area cannot go on the north side because of the terrain. And Dean, some of you guys that run know that they do lost holes where they do because of the kind of terrain it is. And you're not going to get that. You can't do that kind of running in the south side because the terrain's not the same. I also see what Cheryl's talking about, the deer trails, because that when we're walking our dogs through the coulees, we're walking up and down the coulees on deer trails. And I totally understand that. The balance that I see needed is that You can't do the same kind of preservation and recreation opportunities in all parts of the river valley. And I think we need to understand that right up front. I can't tell you how old I am, but when I was younger, I remember 4x4ing in the coulees by the par 3 golf course. Of course, I wasn't driving. Let me make that really clear. So I think Cheryl's right, and all of you are that we've evolved. I think our usage of the coulee system, and I just again want to thank you all for what you're doing. Couple questions I have before I rant anymore. When you're talking about wayfinding, and this ties in when Chris was talking about discussing this with emergency services, is if the provincial government continues their line about us not having our own dispatch, you need more than just signs. You need geotagging. You need something else. So if that's the way we're going to go, you can't just have signs with names on them. That's my first suggestion. And have you discussed that already?
We have had discussions with emergency services. I don't remember when the dispatch came online. We may have had the discussion before the dispatch, the provincial dispatch regulation. But it's something that we will continually work with EMS on. I don't have an exact answer for you right now, but we will definitely keep them as partners and get their feedback on what is best signage for them.
Yeah. Thank you. Because certainly if you have signs with QR codes or something on them with GPS coordinates, would certainly work a lot better than trying to describe which part of 6 Mile Coulee you wiped out on your bike. Second thing was, I'm not sure you can answer this, is that who's talking about the weir? Is that Mr. Rude? Was that you, Stuart, that was talking about the weir?
Yes, that was me. Yes.
So no, I understand what you're saying, but I think our situation is different than other rivers, because that is the source of our water, and that's another reservoir where the weir is, and unless our infrastructure people can understand how to create. I mean, it would be really cool if we had, like they have in the Bow River in Calgary, where they actually have a whitewater section in the middle of the city. That would be great if it didn't interrupt our water supply. And I think people need to understand that, whether or not there's a great portage area or access. Our number one priority is going to be access to water. And I think people need to understand that, whether or not they want to go over the weir on their own and take their chance, or if they don't want to take their watercraft and go around. As long as I'm...
In that?
Excuse me?
Is there a question in that?
Oh, so the question is, has that ever been discussed with our infrastructure? Thank you for that, Madam Chair. Has that ever been discussed with our infrastructure people about how that might occur?
Yes. So Doug Kalp is, of course, the city engineer related to water. And so what I will say, Rob, is that this type of development absolutely does not exclude the function of the weir. And in fact, if you look at the Calgary development, which you're familiar with, the Harvey Passage, that weir still exists. It's the weir for the Western Irrigation District diversion. And the same applies in Boise and Bend and elsewhere, so that you still end up with the reservoir above it. And in fact, in the Lethbridge weir, a fish notch was put into it after the Old Man River Dam as part of that mitigation. So this is not a question at all of removing that essential function. But what you do is you will typically put a shallow notch over a very, very short segment of that very wide weir. And so it really has minimal total impact on the elevation of the weir, which is essential. So yes, indeed, we're with you 100%. City water supply is absolutely critical. But we're pretty confident that this could be done. It's been done many other places. And so, yes, I think that it doesn't exclude that function.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. To echo the sentiments of everybody else, thank you all very much for your participation. This has been a journey for certainly for you and your organizations, but for council as well. So thank you for the work on this. Thank you, Councillor Miashir, or Deputy Mayor Miashir, for the question as well about emergency services. I did have a friend, anecdotally, who fell on her bike and broke her arm down there. and was able to identify she was at the end of the loop, the paved loop by the golf course, and EMS knew exactly where she was. I'm not certain a new system is going to be able to make that available. So how you sign that or how you create that recognition is going to be a challenge. It's going to be important. Something I'd appreciate if you could all do, and I won't do it here because this may take a little bit of time, but all of you in your presentations and in your commentary actually referred to, and I'm going to contextual, or I'm going to synthesize it and put it into a very simple term, sustainable appropriate use. You've all referred to sustainable appropriate use. If each of you that's participating in this, and I can't assign you homework, Chris, because I only have one employee and that's the CAO, but if you would like to do this as well, you're welcome to. If each of you could just take a couple of moments to put that into an email and send it to the same place that you submitted everything. How do you see from the people that you represent, the groups you represent, how do you see sustainable appropriate use? I think there are nuggets in there that I think are going to help us move towards move forward, move towards something, move towards an end goal. Question for, I'm going to go to you, Mr. Adair, if I can. In the absence of a decision by council, as we heard the chair say, this is for information only. So in the absence of a decision by council, what happens?
This wouldn't be Mr. Dare, would this? This is Parks.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Hawkins. Sorry about that. Unless you want to answer, Mr. Adair.
I was just going to text Doug to get the answer, but since he's online, we'll let him answer.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Kaufman. What was your question again, just so I'm clear?
The chair has identified that this conversation, this presentation today is right. Information only, so there's no decision or direction necessarily required from this committee. So in the absence of decision by this committee or by council, what happens?
So our so we have we've identified a number of next steps, and it would be administration's intention to continue with those next steps, with or without any explicit direction from either standing policy committee or city council for that matter. So that's why at this particular point we've identified a number of things that we need to do some more exploration on. Administration would, one of the very first things we want to do is create this working group or advisory group or whatever we decide to call that, in order to maintain that momentum that Mr. Witowski has talked about with the key stakeholders. That working group needs to help us define future decision points for council, whether that is operational issues that we would entertain at the next operating budget, capital investments in order to modify or change the use and create sustainable appropriate use as you described. Wayfinding, whatever that means, is still a work in progress, and it's going to take considerable input from these folks before we can actually come to some definitive options for council to consider at a future date for decisioning purposes. Council will see some investment in the CIP that's contemplated right now that factors in some of the dialogue right now. I don't want to preempt the future economic SPC and the future budget CIP deliberations, but you'll see some of what we've already done factored into a proposed CIP, but there is all kinds of additional stuff that still needs to be done before we can actually ask council to say, this is what we would recommend. Here are your options, and this is what we would recommend. So the only thing I might suggest is if council or the committee feels it's valuable to share this information with council through consent at a regular meeting of council, absolutely feel free to do that. But we don't need any marching orders from either the committee or council right now to continue the dialogue, continue the engagement, and continue to define future options for consideration by city council.
Okay, thank you. So the crux of this conversation, we came together because of Pathway 24. Am I to understand there will be no municipal construction on Pathway 24?
That's correct. That decision has been already made by this council. You won't see that in a future CIP, an upcoming CIP project in the short term during this budget deliberations. Yeah, so that's decided. Nothing new on that front.
Okay, thank you. I have more questions, Madam Chair, but I can hop out and hop back in.
I don't see any other hands up, so if you'd like to continue, go
Okay.
ahead, please.
Interrupt me when others are there, please. I'm not sure who this question goes to, so I'll just throw it out to those who know. I do understand that we have organizations in Crow's Nest Pass and Fernie and Kimberley that provide stewardship for things like off-road running, trail running, mountain biking, things of that nature. How do those organizations work with their municipalities?
I can take a stab at that. Other members of the LTA have taken initiative to contact a lot of the stewardship groups working in these communities. So that includes the 670 Collective, who have partner agreements in place with Alberta Parks. So Cypress Hills Interprovincial Park is one site they work at. Also the City of Medicine Hat and the town of Redcliffe. So they've got 3 different partnership agreements, depending on the type of government and scale of the city. They've also offered us those, and I believe City of Medicine Hat's also open to communicating with us and the City of Lethbridge to help us understand what that should look like. Fernie, I don't know what their agreement looks like, but I think they would have something in place with both the town as well as the public land managers that their trails are onto. Also, interestingly, there and in the Crow's Nest Pass, a lot of their approved single track trails are on forestry leases. So they manage these as recreational trails, knowing that the situation may change in the future. So it really does look different in every sort of context. But I will say that they're all very encouraging and very open, and they're willing to share and potentially come and even meet with us in our group. Whatever this evolves into, I think we would have some support from those communities to help shape what our partnership agreement looks like.
Okay.
So in some cases, it's like direct to Crown or direct to government or city volunteers. In other cases, it's that co-op agreement, partner agreements, or letters of authority, whatnot.
Okay, thank you. Chris, I'm assuming that this information is being gathered or collected by the city for consideration as well.
Yes, and this is why we have brought the stakeholders on, because I don't know the answer to your question. I know there are partnerships that exist. I don't know the structures behind them. So having somebody like Aaron who could help us make those connections, the next step for us is definitely to start researching what other municipalities and community organizations are doing. But we wanted to get through this engagement first. And then, next step will be to start looking at potential agreements that are out there.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, just a second, Councillor Coffin. Mr. Ellis, put your hand up. Do you have an answer for this as well?
Yeah, just as a bit of input, I also I saw something by Sophie Forstrom, who is with the Old Man River Watershed Council, and I think she could have some valuable input as to some ideas. She's had some really good ideas in terms of what they're doing, how to manage all these things.
Thank you. Do any of you, and maybe this is for Aaron and Cheryl, Chris, I'm going to come back to you on this as well. There is this stewardship of cultural and historical preservation as well. We as a municipality have an obligation to broader society. This may be my own opinion, but we have an obligation to broader society in the protection, especially of Indigenous sacred ceremonial Indigenous sites within our community, and especially in the River Valley. Do you know if, Aaron, we'll start with you perhaps, do you know if these agreements talk about preservation as well, or are they predominantly stewardship, sort of the environmental stewardship, the interaction between human and community and environment?
I guess I haven't dove into the agreements too detailed, but I do think they would speak to the respect for sensitive features and sensitive values that need to be avoided. Trail design, good trail network design can also, well, you can design trails to actually take people to some of these features that should be shown and should be interpreted. And of course, on the Indigenous side, that's up to them to decide what should be shared. But of course, there are sensitive features, whether that's cultural or natural, and good trail design would also, of course, avoid impacts to those sensitive features. So it is important, but I think that that's a role that the land manager plays. So in this case, it would be the city would take ownership over that and then guide the process. But so definitely respected and understood on our end as well. That's important. Yeah.
I can answer more. The Historic Places Management Plan that the city has is being worked on to develop greater understanding and to do more potential designation of cultural landscapes. It was missed in the earlier cultural plan, historic places management plan, and that is being worked on. So there's another aspect that's going to come into play with regards to the management of the historic sites.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl, have you seen that in the document you referred to as well, Sylvie? Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, you were cutting out. I couldn't quite hear.
Oh, sorry, just wondering if you had seen that sort of cultural protection reference in the document you mentioned from Sylvie.
Golly, I'd have to review it again. It's been a bit since I watched it.
Okay.
But I do know her personally, but I happened upon this. It was about a year ago. She did the presentation, and it was really, I was going, really good ideas, and great ideas to work with all user groups.
Okay, thank you.
It's going to interrupt.
Could I also make an? Sorry,
could I? For 5 more agenda items. I'm just going to put that out.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jim, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just one interjection. I think there's many examples, not just in Alberta, but right across Canada. I would invite people to also look at the master implementation plan for Gatineau Park, because what they did was have a detailed introduction of how you would take into consideration the cultural and historical concerns too. Many Indigenous issues there on the boundaries and within the park itself. And so that was part of their major implementation plan. It's a very exhaustive plan that they have. And as I said before, incorporates how to design and defragment trail systems and all that sort of thing. They have actually a trail system management plan. So it's very detailed. So I think we need to expand our visions even abroad outside of Alberta, and look at some other things where they have been successful in tackling some quite complex management issues with parklands in sensitive areas.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. I don't see any other hands up, so we're going to move to the resolution. Want to thank everybody. Again, your passion and your dedication to the River Valley is very obvious in your giving your time this afternoon to come forward to the SPC and in all the work you have done. And on behalf of the city and council, your work is appreciated. And we are glad to have you on board. This is for information, but I think with my colleague's support, I'm going to slightly change the resolution so that we will take this as an update to council, so that we can close the loop with the rest of council as well to update them on where this is, that we are waiting for more information on the heritage plan. Work is being done by Errol and other work is being done as well. But we'll just try to close that loop with the rest of our colleagues. Are my 3 colleagues fine with that for information and for an update to council?
Yeah, that sounds a good idea, Belinda.
Yep, thank you.
Since Brian was the first to speak, he's going to pass that or he's going to bring forward that motion.
No problem. Love to.
All in favor? Excellent. Again, thank you all. You are most welcome to stay with us as we now talk about snow and ice and street sweeping. But if you do want to disappear and get back to your regularly scheduled lives, I understand that as well.
It's not that.
Does that include us?
No, that doesn't include my colleagues on council or staff who have to stay for it. But
yeah, we stayed for your guys. You have to stay for the rest now.
I'll tune in on the live stream.
I've seen enough in my day, thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we're only joking, Mr. Jewell, because if there was a blizzard, you would be top of mind for everybody in this community. Anytime there is a snow issue, you are the one they all care to find out about.
Like, who's that guy?
Thank you.
We are very happy to have you here. And of course, we're going to talk about the KPMG suggested actions for snow and ice and street sweeping. And so we will hand it over to you. And Mr.
Madam
Campbell,
Chair?
are you here for presentation as well?
Madam Chair, just before you start this topic, just want to just advise that there is no one in the chambers wishing to speak to this item, just so everyone is aware, and you're good to go.
The weather is way too nice for anybody to be worrying about snow removal today. They're all outside. All right, Mr. Jewell and Mr. Campbell, the floor, unless Mr. Hawkins wants to introduce, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will introduce Adam Campbell we're going to tag team on the two presentations. So he's going to do the street sweeping portion, and I'll handle after his presentation the street sweep or the snow and ice control in this beautiful weather. So Adam Campbell can take it away.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me today. I'm very excited to be here at the Civic Works Committee meeting. As Darwin just said, we're here to talk about street sweeping. So let's start, next slide please, with why we are here. KPMG identified a great opportunity to modify our spring or fall sweeping schedules. We took that back and we started looking at it internally, externally, compiled some of the feedback that we've received over the years, and prepared some options that we wanted to share with you today. Next slide please. Because we are looking for your feedback on if these are the right proposed efficiency opportunities before we begin engaging with the community. You all have probably heard feedback from residents or have questions yourself, and you know, in public engagement, it's a big exercise, and we want to make sure we're talking about the right things before we really get going on it. So before we get to the proposed efficiency opportunities we're going to look at, next slide please, I just wanted to take just a few minutes and talk about why we sweep our streets. I think this is something people often don't understand fully, but there's sort of a three-tiered kind of reason why we do this. The most important to our safety and environment. So I'll start with safety. We wrote tire traction, but it's just traction for everyone, right? Traction for residents, tractions for bicycles, motorcycles, cars, everyone involved. We are living in a winter climate, and there's a lot of material that'll build up on roads in the winter, and then just a lot of material that ends up on the road at all points of the year. But that road, it decreases stopping time, or sorry, those materials, they decrease stopping time. It creates situations where people on bikes, motorbikes, they slide out, and even people walking or with accessibility issues find a hard time getting around. We are in Lethbridge. I'm sure you've all had your vehicle or your person sandblasted. It is just not a good experience, and we can reduce that by reducing the amount of material left in our public right-of-ways. From an environmental perspective, it doesn't look like much when you're driving along, but there's a tremendous amount of like fluids and materials that fall off vehicles when they're driving around. So that comes from, you know, leaking chemicals off your car. You're talking brake pad wearing down. Trucks from industrial areas, they will drag who knows what into the road. And then even just one of the biggest ones is construction traffic that just drives mud and various, you know, rocks and whatnot all over the road. So it's important that we pick that up. All of that ends up in the stormwater system and eventually into the river, theoretically. And so as a good environmental steward, as part of the stormwater management program, street sweeping is very important. Last but not least, Lethbridge is a clean city. I frequently get that feedback from residents when I'm talking around. People like that Lethbridge is a clean city. It's important to them. That is a huge reason why we sweep. It's something people value quite a lot. Next slide, please. So just at a real high level, we broke down our service levels in a way that I think generally makes sense. I'm going to start with the spring sweeping program. So this is by far our biggest program. We cover the entire city, all the boulevards, all the medians that we put traction control material down on regularly. This is an annual program, takes 2 to 3 months roughly. It starts in the spring, should be starting up in April or May here. To complement that, we have website updates, PSAs, direct notifications. We'll actually put signage out on the street. And then 4 years ago, we added a ticketing program to, you know, provide that extra incentive to get cars off the road. What we really want to do here is get all that material that built up over the winter off the roads all at once in one shot, get it done. It's a great program. It's the standard of all cities. And to address the KPMG recommendation, we're not recommending changing it at all, as that is basically best practice for a municipality. The next up on the list, we have summer sweeping at night. So in that program, we do downtown industrial arterials. The frequency is weekly. That's a target. It's not necessarily happens on all the roads. We might get them more, we might get them less, but that's the general target. With all the rest of these, you're going to find there's no notice generally given, there's no signage, there's no ticketing. They're more just ad hoc programs we go out and do. If any of that is needed, we will do it, but generally we don't. Summer day sweeping, that's our guys. When they notice things in the community as they're driving around, or maybe there was a water main break or someone left some material on the road, we'll go clean it up during the day. This is most applicable in residential areas where we can't sweep at night. Fall sweeping, this is the big sort of leaf cleanup in the fall. So realistically, a lot of the city hasn't been swept since the spring, come say October. And so what we have started doing historically over the years is we will go and pick up all the leaves. This is again a common practice in most cities. And yeah, we will pick up all the leaves, but again, there's no communication associated with it. Finally, there's winter sweeping. Winter sweeping, it's the smallest of the programs by a lot, but basically we're just trying to get a head start on spring sweeping and get as much road off get as much materials off the road as we can. The sooner you can get that stuff off, the safer it is for everyone, the better it is for the environment. And frankly, it speeds up the spring sweeping program. Every load you can take off in the winter, you don't have to take off in the spring. So it's important to note that the KPMG recommendation, it came up before the 5 and 10% budget reduction initiative happened. So what this shows you is sort of what the impacted service adjustments are of the 5 and 10% budget reduction exercise to the sweeping program. So no one's actually experienced this yet, but we're hoping that if we do it right and everything goes well, which probably should, might not be super noticeable to your average resident. So in spring sweeping, we're going to have 2 less sweepers out there. We're going to reduce our sweeper fleet by 2 this year. We're going to remove the windshield wiper notification and door hangers. We feel like people are pretty accustomed to our systems and the ticketing programs now. We're going to look at optimizing the number of passes per street. In previous years, we probably could have done a little bit better, and I think with less sweepers, we definitely need to. Last but not least, it might drag out the program a bit just by reducing the cost, but that's okay. We figure we can get it all done unless there's a catastrophic mechanical failure. Should be good to go. Summer sweeping during the day, people who are used to, especially in the older neighborhoods, a lot of sweepers hanging around, we're going to try to park them as much as we can during the day in the summer. So I think you're going to find there's less sweepers out there during the day, but same amount of sweepers at night. So again, this hasn't happened yet. We figured we would keep going with the KPMG recommendation, even though we went through the 5 and 10% budget reduction exercise, because theoretically they're different things. Next slide, please. Oh, one more. Sorry, forgot about that. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the efficiency and enhancement opportunities. Before I start, I just want to explain kind of how they're working. So the KPMG report was about finding efficiencies. Ideally, that was about, finding cost savings, but also we could look at service enhancements, because ultimately I think it's about delivering the service that the residents want. So some of these are efficiencies, some that will save money. Some of them are actually service enhancements that will cost more money, but if they better serve the needs of the community, we didn't think we could complete this exercise without at least bringing them up. For color coding, what you'll find is anything in green is sort of status quo, what we're doing now. Anything in orange is a more moderate change. It's debatable on some of them, but it's the more moderate change. And the ones in red are the more, heavy, big dramatic changes that people might actually notice. The red text is sort of where we're at. We don't want to, we figure people might want to know what we're thinking, and the red is sort of what we're thinking on both these. And it's the same format in this and snow and ice control. So let's start with fall sweeping. So we can obviously maintain the status quo. We've been doing this for a long time. We've researched other municipalities. There's not necessarily a best practice for this. Municipalities have gone different ways on this one, and this is not a new thing. It's been sort of struggled on for a long time, but we can certainly keep doing what we're doing. We could discontinue fall sweeping. So there are places that have discontinued fall sweeping or they don't do it. I would suggest if we go down this road, we would do it on a trial basis and sort of report back, see how it goes, see what kind of feedback we get. Last but not least, the most feedback we get, or that I get anyways, is for people that actually want digital communication, street signage, or ticketing. A lot of people want them all. They really appreciate that we come and pick up all the leaves. Technically, we probably haven't swept since the spring. They They like a clean city. They want us to do more. They want us to build the program. And honestly, that's fine. If that's what people want, that's what we can do. But those are sort of our three options that we want to explore with the community before we make a final recommendation for the fall sweeping program. Next slide, please. After this is lane sweeping. So when we started looking at other cities and kind of what they were doing, what they were doing differently, mostly we were the same, or generally speaking, we were the same as most other municipalities in Alberta. But the one thing that stuck out to me that I thought was interesting was lane sweeping. So there are a few municipalities that actually have a lane sweeping program. Lethbridge, what we do is when we do our big spring cleanup, we'll do all the roads, we'll do all the median boulevards, but we won't generally touch lanes. You can call in and request that your lane be swept. We'll get to it typically during the day in the summer when we can, if it's safe to do so. But it's generally not a service that we offer. So what we're thinking is, well, I mean, it would be definitely a service enhancement where we'd have to adjust something else. But if that's something the citizens are interested in, there's no reason that we couldn't at least look at what it would take to set up a lane sweeping program. It's not something that's regularly requested, but definitely something other people are doing. So we threw it on there to, engage the community with. Next slide, please. All right, last but not least is our downtown industrial and arterial sweeping programs at the nighttime. So right now, just to give you a background again, we have 2 sweepers that run at night, basically from May through till the fall, sometime in October. And they will go around and they will do downtown, industrial, and arterial weekly at nighttime. They normally start at around 6 p.m. and end in the night when they're done their shift. This weekly practice works for us. It is about an average practice around the province. As I surveyed some of my peers, some people do it a little bit more, some people do it a little bit less. Again, it's a target. It's not we don't specify that we're actually going to get to it once a week. Some roads get swept a little bit more, some roads get swept a little bit less. But we could go both ways on this. We could actually reduce the frequency which we sweep road surfaces, and we could increase the frequency. They have the inverse benefits of one another. I don't think one is necessarily right or wrong, but I would suggest the practice we have now has been working for the community, and people generally seem to like it. Next slide, please. So with that, yeah, that's sort of our update on the project. We're gearing up to get out and talk to the community about engagement. But before we did, we just wanted to check in with the Civic Works Committee and ask just a simple question: are these the right efficiencies? Or based on your experience as a councillor or as a resident, is there anything we're missing that we should, be looking at while we're there too? Yeah, and definitely curious what you have to say. So with that, next slide. If you have any questions for Darwin or myself, we'd be happy to take them. Thank you. End presentation.
You guys do know you're asking dangerous things. You're asking council not to ask questions, but to give opinions and ideas. And I see Councillor Miyashiro's hand is already up.
Thank you, yeah, no, thank you guys for the presentation. I appreciate that. I just wanted to make a comment, not really a question. One is that I think the information you provided today puts a bit of perspective on the recommendations. It helps us to understand the issue a lot more, and I just want to thank you for providing that clarity.
You're most welcome, Dr. Miyashiro.
Councillor Kaufman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Adam, for the work on this. And yeah, you know what? I think all of us, when we travel, we look and see how things are done and recognize that things get done differently in every municipality. And as my dad always used to say, the grass may look greener on the other side because it's a result of a leaky septic tank. So other municipalities may look like they're doing things better, but there could be all sorts of undercurrents on that. A couple of things. So this is feedback that I get from citizens on the street sweeping, and the big one is actually on the signage. We put out the signs that say street sweeping tomorrow, And to quote the James Bond movie, tomorrow never comes. Because tomorrow, and weather and stuff happens. I get that, but the most feedback I get on it is people are appreciative of it, but it really is an issue of if you've got a certain day that it's planning to be there, can you put street sweeping Monday the 15th? Or I recognize the signs are static, but if there's something you can do to let people know that today is actually the day, or tomorrow is actually the day, it helps communicate better with citizens. There were a couple of neighborhoods 2 years ago that I heard from in London Road, especially, that the sign sat there kept saying tomorrow and tomorrow. If stuff breaks down, it rains, whatever the case may be, there are issues, but it's just one of those things. It's about communicating the message to the residents that's appreciated. When it comes to the nighttime sweeping, are they sent out every night regardless, or is somebody doing an evaluation during the day to say that this needs to be taken care of?
Both. So we will definitely flag roads that we know are a problem and get them done. One that actually came up this last year that wasn't good was Gary Drive. Gary Drive kept getting dirty. We had a sweeper that went out there 3 or 4 times a week. That was obviously far too much. Ironically, we told him stop going to Gary Drive, and then the next day we had a service request to clean it. But so we will get requests to go clean things. Our foreman will find roads that are dirty, flag it, and pass it forward to our night sweeping crews. But generally speaking, we try to get downtown done once a week. We try to hit all of the industrial roads once a week, and then we do any remaining arterial roads as best as we can. We don't necessarily monitor for how much debris is on them. It's frankly simpler just to do it weekly. That's sort of why it works that way. Right? Trying to actually figure out how much contaminants is on the road with almost, it's better to just go sweep it, right? It doesn't take very long at night to do an entire road. So it's kind of both.
It's the resource, and this is a challenge with things like street sweeping and like transit and public works. You're out there and people see you. And so especially the night street sweeping, and we've got a sweeper that went by our place on an arterial 3 or 4 times last summer, and kind of stand at the window and you watch, and it's the whole, is this efficient? I was out there, I didn't see a lot of debris or dirt, but I recognize that there are other things that could actually be motivating this too. So it's about, as you say, I'm happy to hear you saying, finding that efficiency between sending it out to do it, but if there's not a lot there to do, is it better utilized somewhere else? And I'm sure you'll work through that. Final question in this round, if I can. You talked about the 5 and 10% reduction that was requested by council. Thank you very much for that, as well as the KPMG operational report. What savings has come out of both of these two then? How much have you managed to save or reduce by?
I'll try to answer that if you can, Adam, because there was a slide that didn't get up, and we were focusing on it was actually an 18% reduction, and I can't remember where the slide was here, but if Ryan can go to it, it's slide number 6, and we've identified where we're going to save that it was $285,000, and we're reducing it in 2 components. One is in street sweeping, spring sweeping, and we're going to return 2 of our rental sweepers. And so that's already happened, where we're reducing our operating budget is now lowered even before we put the sweepers out there. So we're going to have less spring sweeping to the tune of about $135,000. That whole program is just under $800,000, the spring sweeping program. And then the summer sweeping program that Adam talked about, that was only about $150,000 initially. So that'll balance out. That means we're not going to send out any street sweepers in the summer. The night sweepers will probably go out, but it might be some of them are going to be needed in the daytime for accidents, and we can lower our night sweeping a little bit. So basically that's the answer to your question, is $285,000 has already been reduced from the operating budget. Now we have to make sure it happens and get our service levels adjusted so that that $285,000 reduction happens this year, spring, summer, and fall. At the end of the year, we have to be the $285,000 reduction.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Parker.
How, in regards to the signage, just to follow up, we put the signs up. We also have the areas where it's no parking, during snow. How are people compliance-wise? Have we actually given out tickets? Has it been an issue?
That was two questions in one there, Councillor Parker.
Thank you.
The first question was around snow routes. The snow routes, we've rarely declared snow routes in snow removal, and I'll talk about that in the next presentation. But in our spring sweeping program, we created this almost 4 years ago. This is going to be our 4th season of a ticketing program. We've handed out a lot of tickets, but fortunately, every year the amount of tickets go down, so people are getting used to it. The number of complaints have gone down. People have gotten used to it. We hire a dedicated enforcement officer to do the ticketing. Usually it's the day before. They'll make sure it's signed properly. The day of, if we can sweep that day, and then they don't ticket the vehicles until after the sweeping has gone through. So we make sure people are given every opportunity to move their vehicles, and then we'll ticket those vehicles after we go through the street sweeping during our spring sweeping. So that's been going on for 3 years now. And I did have a report on how, I think it was 1,500 tickets per season, and it's down to about 700, 750 tickets per season this year. And remember, we have about 41,000 properties we're sweeping every one of those properties.
Perfect. Thank you for those answers.
I don't see any other hands up for this. I think we should move into the snow and ice. And for this presentation, I've switched to a picture of the 1967 blizzard. So hopefully that doesn't happen on paper. All yours, Mr. Drew.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of Civic Works Committee. I'm going to do what Chris Witowski asked you to do very quickly, because it's 16 above right now. We're ready for spring sweeping coming up in the future. But you have to remember, 30 days ago, it was 22 below. And I'm going to draw you back to the beginning, first week of November, when we had the major snowfall. And Councillor Croson's picture would be quite accurate there. So that's where we get a lot of calls, complaints, and requests during a storm and immediately after a storm. So I'm going to try to stay high level, and we'll go down into some detail later on in the presentation. But the first thing is to sync up my presentation. There we go. And next slide, please. I'm going to follow the same format that Adam did. The KPMG identified opportunities for how we can create efficiencies within our snow and ice control program. And basically, it was a comparison between snow plowing and snow removal. And I'm going to talk about the differences between two, and we also talked about the drifting program as well. But it's really fundamental how those are two very different operations. So trying to stay high level, I wanted to just talk overall, the snow and ice control program. It's a combined effort between transportation and our parks department. Transportation handles all snow and ice clearing on roadways, transit bus stops, and intersection ramps for pedestrians on plow routes. Parks manages snow and ice on pathways along roads and also on city-controlled pathways and city-controlled sidewalks. So next slide, please. So the key purpose is really get your feedback before we go to the public, and we want to ask the right questions with the public, because the feedback is never that positive from the public when we're doing a change, if we're doing an efficiency measure, but we have to do it for the right reasons and communicate the right message on behalf of administration and city council. So next slide, please. I think we have just some highlights on the policy. This policy was written in, I thought it was 2009, but it was really written and approved in 2007 as a result of a couple of major blizzards that put us significantly over our snow removal budgets. And that's the snow removal budget. And we also had an ice control budget. They're really the same budget, but they're two different components. The main intent of the policy, the second paragraph, is really the fundamental aspect. We want to create acceptable winter driving conditions with our program for vehicles that are properly equipped for winter driving and operated reasonably in a manner consistent with winter driving. There's also a pedestrian feature there, so we also want to do the same thing for pedestrians. That isn't written in the policy, but the intent is there as well. Another key focus of this program is to maintain emergency services and transit. And so you'll find all of the transit routes are all on our priority 1, 2, or 3 snow removal or plowing maps. Next slide, please. So KPMG basically focused on one key aspect of our snow removal program, snow and ice control program, which is simply plowing versus snow removal. And I'm going to just describe the difference, and I'm sure you're all aware of the on the picture on the right. It's a front plow blade, and it's much faster to push snow to the right, and 40, 50 kilometers an hour. These trucks are always on our arterial roads. The moment the snow starts flying, we've got those trucks out there with sanders on the back and front blades on the front or belly plows. And they're very, very efficient, very fast to do. It's actually about 5 to 10 times more. It's even more efficient than 5 to 10 times, but 5 to 10 times cheaper to do plowing versus snow removal. Snow removal is the slow, cumbersome detail. Once snow accumulates, you have to windrow it to the middle and start removing it. So I'm going to describe snow removal as a reactive measure and snow plowing as a proactive measure to get the snow off the road and allow people to drive and move. So the more roads we plow, the less snow removal we have to do. It's not quite as simple as that, because the mother of all storms could hit, and then we're into emergency snow removal. But those storms are getting less and less. We don't have them 2-3 times a year now. We have them maybe once a year. Sometimes we don't even have them a year. So that's the possibility where even if we plow to the right, when snow accumulates, you might have to remove it because you can only plow to the right 3-4 storms in a row, and then you have too much of a drift. Hopefully the Chinook comes through. If it doesn't, we're into the old-fashioned removing snow. So I'm going to go next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about the plowing. This is our current service level in snow plowing. And then later on, we'll go into a revised map that we're going to show the public, which is going to get some reaction from the public as well. So right now, I can summarize snow plowing is done very actively, very proactively on our arterial roads. The red lines are our arterial roads, high volume, no parking, lots of boulevard space between the curb line and the pathways. And what I want to mention here, all of the plowing routes, the priority 1, 2, and 3 are 22% of our total road system. So our priority 1, the red lines, is 70 kilometers. We have 585 kilometers. That's what KPMG talked about, is we don't plow a lot of roads. We plow the roads we do well, but we don't plow a lot of them, 22%. So next slide, please. So the next snow removal now is the old-fashioned process of windrowing it with graders to the middle. And we have 2 snow blowers now. We had one until 2009, and we bought a second snow blower. So when the other one breaks down, we have 2 to go. Or if we have a major snowfall, we can run 2 crews at the same time. Basically, this is a very expensive process because every one of those trucks that's being blown into is a contract truck. Extra cost to the operating budget. When we have to windrow snow with the graders, we always have to rent 3-4 extra graders. We only have 2 graders. So snow removal is over the top for our operating budget, and that's why when it's a major snowfall, we go over budget on our major snowfall year. We go over budget on our snow removal. In years like this, we'll be way under budget on our snow removal portion of the budget, and we spend about the same number of dollars on our ice control and plowing operations. So in snow removal, it's blown into a truck like this. Once we do that, it's now declared a hazardous good, and so it has to be taken, or it's called a contaminated material. Then it has to go to a snow dump site, which we have 2 of, and then it has to be dumped and managed, and we have to make sure that water doesn't go straight to the river. It has to settle, and we have lots of environmental controls with that. So the less we can remove snow from those streets, you don't have to declare it a hazardous waste if it's in the boulevard space and it melts in the spring. So 2009 and 11, I was going to mention, that's when we had major snowfalls that we can vaguely remember these major snowfalls. And we created snow routes. What I wanted to mention is snow routes are key here. And emergency snow clearing tenders are also key for the mother of all storms, but they don't happen that often. So our plan and suggestion, if we can go to the next slide, please. Now we're going to talk the efficiency operations, and one is a balance of the other. So more plowing, less snow removal. So they match. But you notice in Adam's slide, some of what's red is what we think we can do, even though we're considering all options and we're going to present all options to the public. Maintaining status quo is always an option, and we can continue to do lots of snow removal versus plowing if the public and council decide that. But we believe, administration, we can make significant improvements financially and still maintain our current service levels for accessibility of roads by plowing collector roads and bus routes. And when we look at the snow removal maps, that's basically replacing those priority 2 and 3 snow removal routes, the major collectors, with a plow truck that goes through a lot faster, and it blasts it to the shoulder into the boulevard space if there's a boulevard, or the negative side, if there is a parking space and no boulevard, people may lose parking. People lose their minds when they don't have parking available in front of their house. But it could be a day, could be a week, it could be the entire winter season, like City of Edmonton does. They close off that parking lane for the entire winter season and occasionally load out that parking lane of snow. But now if we still think we can do a minimum amount of collector roads, and these are generally the bus routes. Now, if we go to the bottom part, this is the extreme measure. Plow all roads, including local roads, the 4-meter clear pathway where you have parking on both sides. That's not going to happen from the public's perspective. We can't get those vehicles off because we don't have snow routes. We can get the vehicles off if we start ticketing them, but people aren't going to accept ticketing on a local road. So the negatives totally outweigh the benefits in the extreme case. First, we thought we'd try more plowing. If we go to the next slide, please. So in the picture, this is a picture of Calgary during their mother of all storms. I think this was the one that happened in November of last year, but they actually plowed to the right in some cases just to keep people moving and dealt with the negative consequences of the public's impact. But this is where we would have actually windrowed it to the middle, loaded it out the old-fashioned way, and you can almost eat off that road surface. It's so clean afterwards. But then that takes 8 to 10 days, 10 to 14 days. a long time to remove that snow. Next slide, please. So this is the sample priority plowing update. So basically, the same roads in red are those priority one high volume arterial roads that have no parking on anyway. They're the same roads. The big difference here is on the blue roads is really all of our bus routes. Bus routes are also on the arterial roads, but it covers all the bus routes. Basically, it's the major collectors. Most have separate sidewalks and boulevards where we can put snow to past the parking lane, but lots of these roads don't have boulevards. I'm going to point out Red Crow Boulevard on the west side has a nice clean boulevard that you can push it off to the side, but in the Crow, what's the road called? Red Crow Boulevard is mono curb gutter sidewalk with a sidewalk right beside it. If we did that, they would lose parking for a period of time. But it's much more efficient and much faster to do, so that could be immediately upon finishing the storm, that could be done. So there's some consequences to that as well. We're going to block drainage. Driveways get blocked, even if we try to keep them open with a grader blade. Most of these plow trucks don't have a snow cutoff blade like a grader does. So that is a negative consequence that the public is not going to be happy about when we plow some of these roads in blue. But I did want to mention, do you remember I mentioned 22% of roads we plow right now? This route here is 45%. We would increase our plowing to 45%. And plowing is much more efficient than snow removal. So therefore, we would have a lot better mobility immediately after a storm. But the consequence is blocked driveways, blocked drainage, no parking in some cases. So there's lots of consequences to that. If we can go to the next slide, please. And I'm trying to I'm bouncing back between that information package that we gave you. So I'm providing some of the information from that information package in case you're wondering where that came in from. So both the slideshow and the information package is what I'm working from. So the modified snow removal, the flip side is if we're going to do more plowing, we should be doing less snow removal and saving money on snow removal. However, we know the downtown, it's sacred. It has to be done the same way as it got done in the past. The hospital as well, especially because some of the narrow streets in the hospital. And I think we even had 13th Street North, some of the roads, but we're just reducing the amount of priority 1 snow removal, but also significantly reducing the amount of priority 2 and 3 snow removal, because now we would be plowing it. So that would be the consequence of more plowing would be less snow removal. And we think the downtown, it would be done. The hospital would be done. We also believe schools are very important to remove snow in front. You don't want to leave a windrow in the middle or on the side in front of a school for safety, having kids love to play on snow drifts. We don't want kids in there, and it would also block parking. So those are all areas where high parking. So those 2 areas, or 3, we think it's warranted to continue with the expensive snow removal. We could go the extreme is no snow removal in any of the areas. We would end up doing what Calgary did in some of theirs, plow to the right only in an emergency. But remember, I said we have emergency snow removal tenders, and council would direct us to activate those emergency tenders when the mother of all storms hits. Next slide, please. So basically, this is just the highlighted version of our suggested change to a new snow removal strategy, and all those blue dots are schools. There's a lot of schools out there. The red is the priority 1 revised snow removal map. So the key thing is once you have a windrow in the middle with a grader, within a day, or several days, that windrow has to be removed because it blocks traffic, it plugs transit up. So this here would allow us to do more faster snow removal in these areas and concentrate our time on more plowing. Next slide, please. So another category, so this is has nothing to do with plowing or snow removal. This is basically the traditionally westbound or westward wind, the eastbound from the west, wind coming in during or immediately after a snowfall. Typically, that's our normal case. Typically, that also brings a Chinook with us. More often than not, or it could be 50% of the time, we have a north wind, very cold wind with snow. And so we have both cases where drifting happens from the north or from the west. But we have, Adam tells me, 14 kilometers of snow fencing we put up every year and take down every year. And we strategically try to place it in places that have historically drifted. Usually these are west-facing properties from the west wind. But it's highly requested for other members of the public that, why didn't you put snow fencing in front of my property because I'm getting drifts. We have a drift response plan. All people have to do is call 311. Doesn't matter why they can't get through, whether it's a drift or accumulated snow. We deal with it on a case-by-case basis, and in a storm, there are literally hundreds of them. But we do believe there could be some merit in formalizing a more formal drift response service level plan. And I'm going to call this a service enhancement, but it may not cost a lot of money because it could avoid sending expensive equipment out once that snow fencing is properly managing. The flip side is we could put up no snow fencing or no drift control. That's the extreme edge on the bottom. And I'm not sure if that would save money, because then we're probably going to be called out more often than not in the middle of a storm because of a drift that previously that snow fence minimized that drifting. So this here is tweaking the snow removal program, but it was brought up as a potential area we can look at. And the public just doesn't understand why we put up snow fencing on some locations versus another. So next slide, please. And I'm almost to the end here. So basically, before we go to the public, we want to hear from this committee. Did we get it right? Are we going too hard, too soft, or is this, we need to hear back from the public. Anytime there's change, just like we talked about with the street sweeping ticketing program, the first year was horrendous for calls, complaints on the new parking ticketing program. The second year was less. The third year was 50%. It takes time for people to adjust to a change. But with the overages we've had in our snow removal program, we do believe that this KPMG recommendation has some valid points that we should consider some of these changes that may be warranted, but we also don't want to go too far and have public reaction overly negative, because they're the ones that we're trying to serve here. So basically, and are we missing anything? So we just want to make sure we've got it right, because we don't plan to go to the public more than once. And then we'll come back to council with our recommendations, and you already seen what our recommendations may be, but also gauge what the public's feedback is, and we might revise those recommendations. So I think the last slide, please, is just your opportunity for any questions on snow and ice control or any on street sweeping.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start myself. Direct response. My parents live right across from one of our. Not sure why I'm getting there too. But my parents live right across. And when they moved in, and lately it's
Councilor Croce, I'm getting lots of echo.
Yeah, I think people need to shut their mics off. When you're talking, Madam Chair, it's echoing.
Yeah, I don't know why. I'll try again now. So they had a snow fence across. It's been taken out last few years, and you've done the drift response there. And I can say from what they have told me, they're very appreciative of how quickly somebody seems to respond. That how quickly the graders are out there. You know, their neighborhood will notice a problem and somebody will come. So from what I've seen in that area, the drift response that you're using now seems to be working. People were very concerned when the snow fence didn't go up, but it seems to be something there. And I know I also had a phone call earlier this year from somebody in Hardyville, same thing. And, you know, we got a request put in and staff were out there quickly and the community could go again. So I think with the drift response, I think you're going in the right direction. I think we just need to continually remind people about 311 because they need to know like what they can do. But I think with that one, the changes are going in the right direction. You'll get different feedback, of course, maybe from the community, but from the few areas I've seen, that seems to be going in the right way. My concern with the downtown, especially with the windrowing, one of the things is it's not so much the vehicles, it's the pedestrians. Trying to get around downtown once it's windrowed, because it usually gets pushed out into the intersection, so you can't go across at the intersection. You got to go out into the road. Yeah. So that is often a concern there. So when you are looking at the downtown, please also talk to downtown pedestrians, because sometimes we're putting them into an unsafe place because the snow is just not letting them cross the street in a safe manner.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and it's something we've been working on year after year trying to improve it, and it's not just in the downtown, but anywhere where we windrow a pile of snow and we put it to the center of the road, we're actually, Adam is doing a good job. I'm trying to remind the operators, you have to chop that snow drift back and make sure it's not just the intersection. The intersection starts at the beginning of the pedestrian crosswalk. And so, because some of these drifts might sit there a day, some of them, because of equipment breakdown, can sit there a week. In general, the downtown is done all at night anyway. So the moment we windrow that snow drift up, we generally intend on coming back that night, but sometimes there's equipment breakdown, sometimes there's more snow, so it's generally the same night, and then we try to remove it, but there's always equipment breakdowns and such. Adam, can you comment on the other areas for pedestrian accessibility, because we've been focusing a lot on pedestrian accessibility, even to a point where the intersections, this is the first year we set up a crew where those priority 1 plow trucks are coming around blasting snow, keeping the arterial road clear. The snow goes right into the pedestrian pair ramps and the intersections. Now we're setting up a dedicated crew that works very quickly to clear that area out, and then parks will come in a day or a few days later and clear the pathway. So anything to add to that, Adam?
Yeah, well, I guess similar to what you said, that this is a perpetual issue that comes up. People with accessibility issues, or frankly most people for that matter, they find it hard to navigate the city when it snows. Yeah, so we revamped the pedestrian crew process, brought in more people, have them going out much more than we used to in the past. And we personally have been focusing on trying to make sure those crosswalks are open sooner. It's very hard not to leave a windrow on them when we plow, but we can definitely get back there sooner and clear them up. And then when we're actually loading up snow removal, it's a constant thing. We review it every time. But one thing I find is that, people are people, right? And they forget, or they have a bad moment, or sometimes there's just so much snow that they don't realize where they are, or they leave too much and then they move on. Especially contractors. I find contractors just don't have the experience that our staff do. So you can tell them over and over and over again, and they just do it anyways. And I lost my hair, but it is top of mind always for me when we're doing this, trying to keep the pedestrians on the move.
Deputy Mayor Mearshire.
Thank you, and thank you guys for addressing that whole pedestrian issue. I know Councillor Kaufman will probably speak about it, but he's been talking about snow encroachment on crosswalks for as long as I've served on council with him. And I think Adam and Darwin, it's something that the contractors just have to be aware of, because you guys don't hear about it, we do.
Yeah.
Right. We're the ones that get the emails. We're the ones that get the photos of people in with walkers or wheelchairs that can't get access to crossing the street. So I'm glad of you to recognize that. And I just want to point out again, thank you for doing this work and for laying it out the way you have. I think when you take it out to the public and they're going to see the thought you put into, hey, this is what happens if we choose an option. You have to be aware, if you think this is the way we have to go, this is what's going to happen. So again, appreciate that.
No problem.
Councillor Kaufman, I'll get you just as you're drinking.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And
well, we don't have enough time for that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, for it's only taken 8 years to get it across that this is an issue. So thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you, gentlemen, as well. I do intersect with the disability and mobility community on a regular basis for many reasons, and that is a huge concern, is the blockage of the crosswalks, both at intersections as well as crosswalks proper. Last year there was a bit more recognition. I've actually not heard anything this year, but I don't think we've actually windrowed this year, have we? Touch wood. It is the beginning of March.
Yeah, we haven't done this fiscal year. We've done one time downtown as a result of that November snowstorm.
November, okay. Well, nobody complains, so you must have gotten out and addressed it quick enough. Thank you for that. How many snowplows do we actually own?
I believe we have 12 snowplows with front blades. Some of them have front blades. I think 2 or 3 of them have belly plows, underbody blades. All of them have sanders. We have 2 graders and 2 loaders, and the loaders are the ones that operate the snowblower. So the snowblower is an attachment, and the loader you can also use to load up snow with a snow blade. The rest is all contract equipment from our equipment rental list.
So when we send out the plows to do the priority ones, currently, are we dispatching a group of teams, or are we just sending out individual plows to go off in prescribed routes?
I'm going to let Adam describe. He has a really funky term, and I can't remember the terminology he uses. Adam, can you describe the plow trains, I think they're called?
It's both. So we run gang plows and single trucks. So when it's snowing, lots of snow accumulating, to actually get the road or the snow from one side of the road all the way to the other and not leave a windrow right in the middle of the road. Think Wolf-Up Drive, think like University Drive by the university. You need probably at least 6 plows to get the snow. So the first plow goes in front and they're kind of gang up and stagger it all the way over to the other side of the road. Once the bulk of the material's off the road, it's more of a cleanup activity, going around cleaning out intersections, because if you do leave a windrow at an intersection, and then it's a lot of sanding just to, so the plow blades and tires cause ice buildup, same with the traffic on the road. So yeah, it's a bit of both, I'd say.
Okay, we live proximate to Scenic, and I see 5 of them.
Yeah.
South and then turn around and go back. I'm assuming this gang is doing the primaries at least.
Yes.
They would be doing all of those red priority 1 plow routes. Okay. So even the blue, when I show you the proposed plow routes, those would be 2-lane undivided roadways. That would likely be maybe a gang of 2 or 3, because then they can plow it from the center line to the parking lane potentially to the boulevard space if there is one. And occasionally we might use a grader to polish it up and use a grader a couple of minutes later, and then it makes it a lot cleaner. But that's going to have a huge impact as a change to the public, because they're used to us windrowing it to the middle and cleaning it up absolutely beautifully after those first 10 days of pure torture.
Okay, thank you. On the snow removal side of things, do we have a threshold, or is it very much sort of a?
It is. I think it's after about 5 centimeters is when we send equipment out, but it's when it impedes traffic. you can let snow build up. If you have one snowfall and it packs down, another snow, you can have tons of snow and it doesn't even affect traffic. The moment we get complaints, especially from our emergency services and transit, those are the vehicles we're most concerned about. But usually your public is crying big time before they even, we get calls from emergency services.
Okay, and transit has struggles with windrows, especially in the smaller, or in some areas, correct? Okay, thank you. Snow fencing, have we ever considered living snow fences? Worked with parks to some of the areas where it's city property, we could actually put in shrubbery, some deciduous. I don't like evergreens in this prairie, but you can do that as well. Have we talked to parks about doing that and then negate the necessity for fencing?
I believe there's about 2 kilometers, 1.5 or 2 kilometers along University Drive or Métis Trail or both, where when the big storms hit, I think it was 2011, when we went to council and we had, I think it was $50,000 approved from the snow removal budget to put up permanent snow fencing. So we put up permanent snow fencing there for westbound, for westerly winds or easterly winds from the west. And that stayed for a long time. The big thing is, if it stays up permanently, it collects debris and you still have to maintain it and remove debris from it. The key thing about temporary snow fencing is it has to be clean and it has to allow a bit of wind to flow through it. And it has to be set up so many meters from the roadway, usually into a park area, because it's too close to a standard roadway. And then that impacts parks operations for people that are walking or people that are enjoying that park. So we haven't talked to parks about potentially leaving it up in a park space. We just get a lot of calls requesting removal.
Yeah. Sorry, Darwin, I'm talking about trees and shrubbery as opposed to fences. Do natural, what's called a living snow fence in the areas that on property that we own. In the areas where it is an issue and we have to go back every year to put up fences, or to prevent putting in a permanent fence, instead put trees and shrubs. Has there been a conversation with parks about that at all, or it's not really something we think about?
It's not something that would be effective because you can't plant your trees close enough together, and parks wouldn't be able to maintain 100 trees about 2 feet, about 6 inches apart. You need to have a close space that slows the wind down and drops the snow right after, before or after the snow fence. So it wouldn't be effective. Just like trees are.
Yeah, somebody may want to look at the literature on that, because usually it's rows. Again, I'm not an expert, but it's something I'm seeing in other municipalities. So we'll just leave that. And finally, if I can, Madam Chair, I'm for more roads and windrowing the downtown and around the hospital. I think providing more service that creates efficiencies elsewhere as well would be the compromise for me. And yeah, you've got to dig out your car, unfortunately, but maybe that's where we look at the snow routes and people learning that we've got other things that we can do to make it a more efficient delivery of service. So that's where I'm at. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, Councillor Parker.
Yeah, thank you. I want to make sure I heard Councillor Kaufman right. Did you say more roads? Can you explain exactly what I mean? I think I'm on the same page as you, but what do you mean by the more roads?
Let me just call up the presentation again.
Thank you.
It was on page 4.
We only have 45 minutes for 4 presentations, so just gonna throw that out there.
Page 4, efficiency opportunity, plow more roads.
Plow more roads. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Councillor Parker, was that your only question?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to have clarified because I think I was on the same page. So good. Thank
All
you.
right. So we are receiving this as information and providing the feedback that we did on this presentation. Councillor Kaufman, are you good making that motion?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
All right. All in favor? I'm going to assume nobody's saying anything means we're good. All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Jewell and Mr. Campbell. Two vital parts of what we do as a city, and we thank you for the work you've done on this. And I can't wait to hear what the public has to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right, we move now to Ms. Johansson and Mr. Malcolm on Heart of Our City and changes to governance. We have the presentation. I'm going to just remind all of us, again, about 50 minutes for 4 more presentations. So, no rush at all, Mr. Malcolm.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I assure you we will be as quick as possible. So for yourself, Belinda, as well as Councillor Kaufman, you will have seen most of this presentation last Thursday as part of the governance SPC. And the reason why we're at 2 SPCs sharing a lot of the same information is that the Civic Works SPC is the parent SPC to the Heart of Our City Committee, and we wanted to bring forward our annual report information from 2020. But at the same time, we wanted to share one of the biggest projects that we've been working on, being our governance review. And so we were going to touch on that very quickly, understanding that most of that information was presented to the governance SPC, being slightly more appropriate. So I just seen a hand up from Mayor Shiro, so I'll maybe pause for a second.
I think his hand went back down. I think it was.
Okay, we're going to continue. So with that, I am going to let our chair, the Heart of Our City Chair, Lorian Johansson, to kick us off.
Good afternoon. I'm Lorian Johansson. I am, as Andrew mentioned, the chair of the Heart of Our City Committee. This is my first presentation to you guys, and I'm very pleased to be here. Like Andrew mentioned, as part of the restructuring process last year, we were placed under the jurisdiction of this committee. And so we're here today to present the annual report from the Heart of Our City Committee. Given the nature of 2020, the annual report is usually presented in March. Last year's report was delayed until September of 2020. So we did cover most of last year in September when we presented. This annual report will briefly go over all of that and then provide an update from September of last year to now. We have, in the last couple of years, faced some interesting challenges in the downtown, but we have accomplished a lot too, and we're very proud of the things that we have accomplished, given the set of unique challenges that we've faced, especially with the COVID pandemic. We've been involved in the creation of the new downtown brand. We've helped with implementation of council policies and plans, the adaptive reuse policy, the clean and safe strategy. And as Andrew has touched on, we have undertaken the governance review, which we presented to the governance SPC last week. I will turn it back over to Andrew to take you through the details of that and the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Lorian. So Ryan, I'm going to ask you to get to slide 6, I believe. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to touch on a few of the major highlights of the past year. So with COVID-19, like many folks, we took a direct and deliberate attempt to meet strategically to understand what COVID-19 was doing specifically for the downtown. And we identified a task force that represented the Downtown BRZ, the Heart of Our City Committee, the EDL, and the Chamber to focus on downtown specific strategies. And there's a list of different things that we discussed under this item. As Lorian mentioned, the biggest project was our governance and operational review, and we'll provide more information later. Next slide, please. So the implementation of the downtown clean and safe strategy has remained a priority, and COVID-19 has compounded and complicated our clean and safe efforts, from the ability of our various operational teams, from Clean Sweep, Diversion Outreach Team, and our city team, to have people on the ground and responding, all the way to the increase of issues as many of our most vulnerable population have found themselves in an even more difficult time than they were having before. Next slide, please. As it relates to exciting and vibrant, we were happy in the first reopening of during the pandemic to launch the new downtown brand. And this was a collaborative effort between the Heart of Our City, the City of Lethbridge, and the BRZ. and we were able to leverage $50,000 from the Government of Alberta's Community and Regional Economic Support Program. Our hope is that as things reopen once again, we are able to leverage that brand as really demonstrating and sharing what all downtown has to offer. We've been pivoting the activity grant, it seems like, continuously since last March, and we're going to continue to this summer, trying our best to support events and festivals in hosting their events safely in the downtown core. And we have launched and been quite successful with our parklet, patio, and street vending program, and are excited for this year's ability to roll it out even further. In 2020, 20 permits were issued, which represented a 122% increase since our quote-unquote revamp. Next slide, please. Over the course of 2020, we were able to utilize CIP public realm enhancement funding to realize a number of improvements in the downtown, which are visible from our parklets to our new planter boxes, which are actually self-watering. So instead of having to have either parks crews or the Clean Sweep program water these on a weekly basis, they actually get filled up once every about 2 months. So the operational impact has been very, very beneficial. We've also done some spot improvements, as you can see in the top image there, where we removed some planters that had become stale and needed for updating. Next slide, please. One of the biggest projects that we're most excited about is the Festival Square Market Plaza. In 2020, we completed a concept design process with public feedback and launched a bit of a pilot using planters and modular tables and chairs in front of the Telegraph and Gate Church, which was very successful, and we've received lots of good feedback, and we've been able to leverage Government of Alberta municipal stimulus funding to proceed with detailed design and construction, which we are currently working on right now. Next slide, please. And two of the last initiatives or programs was a personas development, which was a public feedback component survey that allowed us to develop 8 to 10 unique personas for the downtown user, which allows us to better understand what the public and essential businesses feel is needed or missing from the downtown. For development grants and incentives, the Heart of Our City Committee was influential in providing feedback into the development grant program that Council approved back in November. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, 2021 will be an incredibly important year for our downtown and our urban core. It's going to be pressured due to COVID and our pre-existing conditions, but we're very excited about some important projects. We're going to continue the implementation of the Clean and Safe strategy. We're going to implement the recommendations of the governance review, planning and advocating for the financial support for downtown, including the upcoming operating cycle, as well as the capital budget, which will start shortly, and continued evaluation on the impacts of COVID-19 and trying our best to be responsive to those. Next slide, please. So this takes us kind of away from the annual report and into sharing some findings of our governance review. Next slide, please. So as noted several times, downtown revitalization is at a critical point for a variety of reasons. But what we were looking at doing as short as a year ago was actually rewriting the Heart of Our City master plan. And we had a $250,000 budget to do so. So we started to understand and ask questions around what the scope of that project would be. And we came to the realization that we really didn't need another vision or another master plan. The existing Heart of Our City master plan was still very relevant. And what we needed to do was just refocus and look at roles and responsibilities and a new action plan. Next slide, please. So as part of this, we put out an RFP and created a steering committee that was made up of Heart of Our City, BRZ, and City Admin. Next slide, please. And so WMC was the successful consultant that was hired. They conducted extensive interviews, research, and analysis, and developed a nice governance review report that provided 6 recommendations. Next slide, please. And next slide. So the 6 recommendations are identified in the report, and I will touch on a few of them as we go forward. Next slide, please. The main identifying factor of the governance report was around roles and responsibilities, and that there was continual confusion by members of the committee, by members of council, and the general public around who are these three bodies involved in revitalization? How are they the same and how are they different, and who's doing what? And so what have we been trying to do is focus in on really describing who does what. And we have this new Venn diagram that helps us to describe that. And we're hoping this becomes a fundamental image that we can leverage going forward so that everyone understands who the players are in this revitalization game and who is exactly doing what. Next slide, please. The governance review also provides a number of information, including a service review, comparison of other organizations, and a financial analysis. And I encourage you to read that at your own time. Next slide, please. As it relates to implementation, there was the 6 recommendations in the governance report, and it was up to the committee to determine how we were going to move forward with that in an implementation plan. And an implementation plan has been drafted and has been supported by both the BRZ and the Heart of Our City. And we are in the process of now going through that implementation process, which includes the amendment of the Heart of Our City terms of reference, which is part of what we would like to share with you today. Next slide, please. So this is really the elements that we had shared with the governance committee, and I will leave most of the details, understanding that they probably have more interest in that than this committee per se. But I did want to go to the next slide, please. One more. And draw on a couple of key things here in the statement of purpose as it relates to the expansion of the concept of the downtown to one of the urban core. So the Heart of Our City master plan, actually going to get you to go to the next slide, please, Ryan. So this map represents the area that was identified in the Heart of Our City master plan. And it identified a number of districts that differ from what we might call the downtown boundary. I've included the red line on this map, which actually reflects the downtown boundary that both our downtown area redevelopment plan, as well as the downtown BRZ, utilized to delineate its area. The Heart of Our City master plan, according to this map, covers an area much greater than the downtown, including the Upper East Side, the Civic District, the Broadview District, and Center Village District. And so one of the purposes of our Heart of Our City rewrite or the terms of reference is to expand the scope of the committee to beyond just the downtown to take into consideration and provide support to this greater area. Next slide, please. Although the governance report spoke specifically to the relationship of downtown, it was mentioned by the consultants that they believe this would create a template for the use of supporting other districts into the future. So on the Venn diagram, although it says DBRZ, which represents the downtown BRZ, that term could be replaced with a multitude of new or other BIAs that represent the urban core districts. And we would be positioned both as Heart of Our City as a committee and the Urban Revitalization Department to support additional BIAs in the support of their districts. Next slide, please. There was a little animation there. So one example that I wanted to bring forward to this committee is my understanding is that the last Civic Works, there was some questions around the transportation projects along 13th Street and 5th Avenue as it relates to how are all of these planning activity infrastructure programs being considered in relation to one another. And I was asked to maybe speak a little bit to that. And so we are speaking to each other, whether that's revitalization, planning, infrastructure, and other departments. However, there's an opportunity to formalize that role and relationship through this process, and that we would be able to more succinctly address and look at issues through this new format, utilizing Heart of Our City Committee as a voice of that area. Next slide, please. The duties and responsibilities is been updated directly to reflect the recommendations of the governance report. Next slide, please. And there's a house of housekeeping amendments, again, probably more pertinent to the governance committee than this Civic Works. So next slide, please. So with that, I will leave it to any questions. Again, the purpose of today's presentation was to provide you the annual report and to update those who were not on governance committee as to the ongoings of the committee, And I'm just looking down to see a text from Lorianne that she had to run to another call. So she is thanking everyone for your time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Malcolm, and thank you, Mr. Hanson, on our behalf. Do any of the members have questions? Deputy Mayor Mira Sherrill or Councillor Parker?
No, yeah, sorry. Thanks. No question. Just a comment is glad to see you expanding the reach of the committee and looking at the urban core versus just downtown. I think that's a great idea. I think that's something we've talked about. I think Councillor Croson brought that up too when we were talking about development and redevelopment. So good for you. Thank you. And thank you very much for this today.
I have nothing to add. I just want to say thank you once again, Andrew, you and your team. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, Councillor Mayor Sherrill is going to make the motion to thank you and to accept this as information.
I will.
All right. So I'll move. Is everybody good with that?
Very good.
Excellent. So we move now to the last three presentations. Move to the last three presentations, which is, first one is for us to meet Mr. Sanderson, our new transit manager, and for him to introduce himself, and then Access-a-Ride and Transit on Demand in City Link. So Mr. Adair, I see you popped in, so I'm assuming you're going to introduce Mr. Sanderson. Yes. Welcome. Oh, just a second.
Trying to get going.
There, now you can go. I've got my bus now. Go ahead.
Perfect, perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. And I just want to take this opportunity to formally introduce our new transit manager who started December 7th with us. And Tim Sanderson comes to the city here with a lot of amazing qualities. And I just want to speak quickly as we were looking for our search, and we went a North American-wide search to find the correct individual to come in, and we were looking for that individual who had transit experience. And as you'll be able to see with Tim's experience, he's actually started as a transit bus driver. And in fact, it goes beyond that. His father was a transit bus driver. So we're talking, you know, a lifelong transit within Tim's blood. So we're very excited about his knowledge that he brings to us. In addition to that, Tim comes with some, you know, some top-notch quality education pieces that he's worked very hard along his journey of continual education. So with those pieces, we can probably move on to the next slide. I don't know if it's up or not. I can't see it here. There we go. So it just highlights Tim's quality education that he's received along the way. And then I think one of the really exciting pieces for us, and that would be the next slide, if we could, please, is his experience. Tim comes, again, like I said, from a transit driver right up through the different ranks, and he's worked in many different places such as Nashville, Brandon, Manitoba, Des Moines, Idaho, and Ann Arbor, Michigan is where he has worked in different leadership roles throughout the transit industry. In addition to that, he's also had some consulting work, which again has helped many other municipalities and states along their transit journeys. So in Tim's short time here since December 8th, he's already been able to help our transit department gain some traction, bring in that expertise that I believe we really needed, and help us move forward with some really exciting projects like Transit on Demand. With the experience he has, he's going to be able to help us navigate through that. Being mindful of time, I will turn it over to Tim so that he can talk about his plan and how he's going to work and help us move forward with our transit industry. So thanks, Tim, for joining our organization. You're a great asset, and I look forward to years of amazing stuff from you. Not that I'm putting you under the gun here, but...
We're throwing you under the bus.
Yes.
But, welcome. We'd love to hear, you know, if you've had 2 or 3 months on the job. If you could update us on what you look at with Access-a-Ride and CityLink, we'd love to hear it.
Sure, that's great. The good news is I only have 48 slides to go through for the next little bit here, so there should be no problem. I got 34 minutes in order to do it. Thank you again for the warm introduction, Greg. It's great to meet you. Great to meet the SPC, and I'm really excited to be in Lethbridge and really excited to continue on. I got a couple of slides here that I'll just burn through really quickly, just talking a little bit about my philosophy and outlook. So the first thing is through my experience, I've worked in both not-for-profit, private sector, a million ways of running transit systems. But I always look at it from a business perspective that transit is a consumer product. People do have choices. Even the captive market riders that get talked about quite often, they have other choices. They can buy bikes, they can walk. And it's really about mobility and good customer service. Good customer service is, to me, more about just the interaction in the bus operator with the passenger. It's very important, something we need to work on, but it also goes into the fare structure, the reliability of the service, that the bus actually shows up on time, and then relevance. Is the bus going where you need it to go? I believe in using KPIs to focus on positive outcomes. We've actually done a considerable amount of work in the last few months in developing some new KPIs. Can I get the next slide, please? My other passion, or here's a few other passions, is innovation. Mobility as a service is a big tagline. It's the upcoming thing in transit, where transit's more than buses. Transit's about mobility and finding those interactions. The big two pieces are fixed route and demand response. We have both of those in Lethbridge as regular transit and accessoride. But in recent years in many markets, like the transit on demand market, they're melding. But with that, we also like to add in, and at least we'll be excited to work on, is some of the other more innovative modes. Shared ride, whether it's through TNCs like Uber or Lyft, or even just a van pool program, something to complement the transit system. Bike share, scooters, all those other micro-mobility things are very complementary to transit as well. Finally, when I was in Ann Arbor, home of the University of Michigan and absolutely Ford Motor Company land, we work a lot with Ford Motors because they don't believe that cars are going to look the same in the next 20 years. They're working to get out of the car business. And one of the big things they're taking a look at is the whole mobility picture and how data really works. With the upcoming 5G networks, with autonomous vehicles, with all these other sorts of things, there's just a world of opportunity, and this industry is really going to be changing in the next few years. Speaking of automation, safety through automation, I don't foresee, and I would love to have this conversation. I do have this conversation with everybody over a beer, over what the future of automated vehicles are. I don't believe that their buses will ever be fully automated for a number of different reasons, but they are going to be, I'm sorry, they're not going to be unmanned, but they will be automated at some point in time. Automation is definitely safer. It really is the coming phase. And how do we implement that into traffic, into transit? Electrification, we're already there now. By 2035, we're probably not going to be able to buy diesel buses anymore. So that's the way the industry is going. And then fare structure, having flexibility with fare structure, providing different ways of doing it, and pricing transit in accordance with its use, and increasing ridership and desirability through fare structure is really an upcoming trend. Next slide, please. Just some quick first impressions. First of all, and I went over this slide with my team, and they took exception to the first one, where it says that I've got one of the best teams that I've ever worked with. They said, listen, this is the best team that you've ever worked with. And I've got to agree with them. The passion from the rest of the transit leadership group to the professionalism of the operators, mechanics, service crew, accessoride operators. I'm really fortunate to have a great team. Just some quick numbers I want to run by. This is from the Ipsos survey that council sends out before budget deliberations. And there was some really interesting stuff in it. The first thing is 84% of Lethbridge of people in Lethbridge feel that transit is important or very important. That's a really good number, especially for a smaller community. Of that, 78% of Lethbridge felt satisfied with Lethbridge transit. That means that there's a 6% gap between the people that feel satisfied with the service and the people that feel that it's important. That's the largest gap out of any city department that was surveyed. 3% of transit uses transit, 3% of Lethbridge uses transit regularly. That's right from the census. So that means that 3% of Lethbridge, minimum 3%, would use transit, but it doesn't work for them, right? That's just strictly from the numbers. That equals almost 3,900 people at minimum that really want to use transit, but the system that we've created for them doesn't work. And so that's That's what I see as my mandate is how do we get those 39 people on the bus? Next slide, please. And that's it. And I'm open for questions. I skimmed her down on the slides, so.
It may be simplest if you could jump into your accessoride one, and then we'll
Absolutely.
Sessions together. My colleagues are amenable to that.
Yeah, I am at the mercy of council.
Oh, never tell us that. But yes, we'll jump into accessoride next.
Okay.
I'll just say, Tim, welcome to Lethbridge, and you had me at a degree in political science and master's of public administration, so you didn't have to go beyond that slide.
Thank you, Councillor Kaufman.
Yeah, no matter what else you have, Tim, you can have nothing else, and Jeff likes that already.
It makes me the best conversationalist at the Telegraph.
Nice.
Sounds good. I'm ready to roll. If I can get the next slide, please. So this is about the accessoride eligibility determination. I'm just going to do a quick recap here. The first thing is that this is eligibility determination, not the eligibility criteria. I'm going to read this statement just verbatim, and I don't like doing that on slides, but this is important. Accessoride is a demand response transit service for people with a disability that inhibits them from riding accessible conventional transit. So it's very important that this mandate is not changing. That's still going to be the criteria that we're doing. What we are changing is the process that we're doing in order to determine eligibility. So it sounds like a bit of a nuance, but it's a fairly important nuance between that. So if you were eligible because you couldn't ride the transit system, the fixed route transit system before, and that hasn't changed, then again, your eligibility status should not change. We just got a different way of determining it. KPMG
Sorry, Tim, I'm just going to interrupt. Madam Chair, I think I have through this process on this conversation. Yeah, good question. I actually am going to declare conflict because of our involvement with Accessoride as a family. And you can just send me a text when this conversation's done. So I'm going to step out of the meeting at this point.
Understandable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So if I can continue, this is based upon the KPMG report that the process be in line with really other transit markets and determine eligibility. We came in April and September of last year and updated council. Next slide. So here's our progress so far. So we started working on an RFP right after we met with council in September. Unfortunately, when that closed right before Christmas, we had no responses. When we reached out to the companies that we were kind of confident were going to respond, they indicated that they didn't respond because of COVID's impact on their potential staffing. It was just really the wrong time to send it out. But that being said, all was not lost. We contacted with local contractors that do this thing, the local office of national corporations that do this type of service in other transit markets. And we're working with procurement to develop a contract and plan for the local contractor. It just put us back a few months. As of today, I'm very optimistic that we're going to come up with a contract and we'll have this agreement in place. So our next steps are to finalize that contract, finalize the communication plan, because this is a big change for our Accessoride customers, and we want to make sure that we provide a level of comfort to them of what's going on, that they're informed of what these changes are. A really important piece is to develop the appeal process, our committee, and for organizations that have gone through this previously, especially when it first starts, there's a high amount of appeals of determinations that may happen, and it's important to get that criteria and that committee struck, and to make sure that that committee has some respect in the community, that it's got some stature. And then, of course, to develop the criteria along with the contractors that we'll be working on. Next slide, please. So just talking about some challenges and opportunities, and I'm basing this, I've watched a number of the other presentations on this issue through the over the last months. And I just kind of want to be on the record to make sure, and I know that this was said before, but just to ensure that it's fairly clear that this eligibility screening is unlikely to result in any savings. There's a number of reasons for that, and I'm going to touch on a few of those. This is still a very good business practice, but it's unlikely that there's going to be a dollar savings. That being said, all's not lost. I think we've got ways of saving money. Ridership is high because the fixed route system does not meet the needs of the community. And that's what we see in a lot of, especially a lot of systems like this, is the appeal of Access-a-Ride is less in the accessibility of it and more the utility of the system. So we'll talk about that a little bit in a couple of slides. Just some opportunities we have. The first one is working on CityLink Transit on Demand. We think that there's some real opportunities here for that, and that the eligibility process will reduce future growth, which is something that every transit system has seen as growth in the paratransit market. Screening is improvement, and this brings us in line with industry best practices. Next slide, please. Just talking about the eligibility program results. This is from the TCRP, Transit Cooperative Research Program. It's the gold standard of doing transit research, albeit a pretty boring subject, but they are the pros at this one. So they did a study of 37 U.S. transit systems that went from a system that we have, similar to what we have with one person just making a determination based upon a paper application, to going to a conditional, unconditional, having a firm or a contractor, or setting up a system where we've got professionals making those determinations. And this is the results. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but basically, most of them went from 99 or 98% approvals under the old system to 95% approvals under having professionals do it. So just based upon that, we're not anticipating that we're going to see a lot of changes going forward. Next slide, please. Current status of Access-a-Ride. We're over capacity. This is another reason why we don't expect potential savings to come through, because even if we were to reduce the number of qualified Access-a-Ride people through this process, we're over capacity. So that would just free up capacity for the remaining riders to use, right? Right now in Access-a-Ride, unless you have a subscription, you have to book your trip 7 days in advance in order to be secured a spot. People even try doing it the day before. We offer a day before, but especially during busy times, that's not available. We've got a lot of people that want to get on the subscription list because that guarantees them a ride. So again, we've got this excess capacity out there that this is not going to help. Even if it does free up room, that capacity is going to be gone. Demand is also going to continue to increase as the population ages, as quality of life and opportunities in the community increase for persons with disabilities. Every accessible curb cut, every accessible entrance, that improves access for our customers. So we don't see it necessarily decreasing, but you can see there was a bit of a flattening out in 2019. 2020, obviously, I mean, it's off the trails less, but that's an anomaly. Next slide, please. Next step for other potential strategies. Again, this isn't going to be the silver bullet, but we think through a mix of other strategies we can control growth and expenses. The first one is investing in the fixed route and making it more relevant. That's worth its weight in gold. Merging Access-a-Ride and Transit on Demand, they're the same service. They're just different target markets, and there's definitely some efficiencies that we can find in there. Pedestrian improvements, Lethbridge is pretty good. I don't own a car, so I walk everywhere, cycle, or take the bus. I mean, I've got my bones to pick at some of the pedestrian stuff, but overall, compared to the other cities I've lived in, Lethbridge does a really good job. Even more improvements with that will even help out the load on Access-a-Ride as well. Travel training is important. Community outreach is important. right sizing our fleet, not necessarily on the big bus side, but on the little bus side. There's nothing wrong with maybe having some sedans in the fleet, just to give a mix. We don't always need to send out a $220,000 bus to pick up paratransit people. And the community partnerships. Next slide, please. And that's it for questions on that one. And now I'm going to talk about, oh, I'm sorry, Councillor.
No, if there are questions specifically to this, we should ask them now, because then we can invite Councillor Kaufman back. So, okay. Deputy Mayor Sherrill.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim, very much. Appreciate this. Nice to see you again. Tim and I got to meet on another committee I'm on earlier. One question, Tim, really quick, is there's been discussion about dispatch being an issue for Access-a-Ride, maybe, and you're saying that the disability determination might not have as much effect on budget or anything. But what about dispatch? I know stories, and I used to work in the disability sector in Lethbridge, when 2 or 3 buses are dispatched for 3 people, let's say, or there's 3 buses from the same, and I'm talking about from facility-based kinds of things where 3 buses come for 4 people or something. Are those issues that you've already talked to your staff about and that they're wanting to address?
Well, and we're working. Thank you. That's a great question, Councillor. Or sorry, Deputy Mayor. It isn't necessarily an issue with dispatch. It is, again, there's going to be anecdotal statements of times when the ball gets dropped and everything like that. But taking a look at it just from a KPI, from managing through metrics, our metrics are pretty good. Our passengers per hour are in the 2.5-ish range. Again, I think that there's room for improvement on there, but it's not going to set the world on fire. The best transit systems that I'm familiar with are running in the 3 passengers per hour range. And those are the best guys, right? Those are the guys that are actually doing it right. So there's some room there, but not a lot. We're not going to get savings in paratransit. It's not going to come. The only thing that we can do is really hope to control it going forward. And I don't want to sound like I'm Debbie Downer and not optimistic. But I also want to manage expectations of realistically what's going to be able to do. The persons that cannot use fixed route transit because of a disability, that number of people is not going to get smaller into the future. And as the community welcomes them, this is really a good thing, that this service is growing because they're not getting stuck in their houses anymore, right?
Right. So. Great. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Mine's not so much a question, just a comment. And I know it's supposed to be questions, but thank you for looking at this holistically, because the only way we will improve Access-a-Ride is by improving the entire transit system so that people actually have the options that they need. And I'm going to just text Councillor Kaufman because I don't think I see any other hands in the queue. But if you want to go on to CityLink, I will just let him know he can rejoin.
I would like to comment. I'm pretty sure that's a GMC bus you got back there, and I love it. So thank you.
Can we have that color of buses again? I used to love that color.
Hey, I'm game. I think Tara's on the line. I don't know what she's thinking about that, but I'm game.
All right, on to CityLink.
Okay, CityLink. Again, so CityLink, it's a new term for you. It used to be called Transit on Demand. Transit on Demand did not tell the full story of this, so I am never, ever, ever, those words Transit on Demand aren't going to come out of my lips anymore. So when I'm talking about CityLink, that's what it is the Transit on Demand project going forward. That's our branding for it. So get the first slide, please. Just a little bit of a recap here. I won't go into too much on this one,
hey,
but
how'd it go?
Sorry?
What's it?
Councillor Cheryl, shut off your microphone.
Your mic's strong, guys.
Hey, I know this person over here, and I was able to get through this way.
Councillor Cheryl, shut off your microphone.
Nice,
So I
good.
think everybody was excited and.
Okay, so again, I won't go through too much of this. This is just simply some history, but just for some terms of reference, there's CityLink, which is we're referring to it as the entire system, but it's a fixed route system to improve the efficiency and effectiveness that's necessary in order to make the on-demand zones work. The other key piece, which you'll probably see as we go through the CIP, is CityLink hubs. These are infrastructure products that really increase the effectiveness of the entire CityLink system. So you get that next slide, please. Just a little bit of the progress right now on the fixed route portion. So on the high frequency core network, we've redesigned the routes, new route alignments on it. So we've basically restructured that entire system in order to just make it a lot more relevant. All of those decisions are based upon the Stantec report from 2017. Demand response, conceptual design, we've determined where the zones are and are working on the technology. And then on the city hubs, the CityLink hubs side, the proposals have been submitted to the CIP, so you should be seeing those soon. Our next steps for fixed route is to develop the headways and the frequencies. That's where the rubber hits the road as far as that goes, and develop the public timetable. Once we've developed the public timetable, we want to go out and get some feedback from the community, from our riders, just in order to make sure that we didn't miss anything big and to really get their feeling on it. Based upon that, we'll take whatever input we get from there and adopt it into the final network design, which will come shortly after. Once that's done, then we would develop the work assignments for our bus operators based upon that, communicate the changes, and then just the technical installation. So we got a little bit of work to do. Can I get the next slide? I'm sorry. I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about the CityLink hubs. It's a bit of a new concept. In the interest of time, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. There's some illustrations on there. Basically, what they are is they are small multimodal facilities that allow for the interface between fixed route buses and demand response buses, bike share, car sharing in the future, all those different modes in one place outside of the central hub. The other big thing, at least that a couple of them do, is they allow us to short-term buses as well, which saves money and saves time. So next slide, please. A little bit of the timeline. I'm not going to spend too much on this, except for, if you can see in the middle, update council in June 2021. After we do the stakeholder engagement, I would like to come back to council and present it, just so that before we actually pull the trigger on this in September, that council's had an opportunity to see what feedback we get from the community on the final design. Next slide, please. Just some of the challenges on this. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Again, significant changes on the public consultation just because of COVID. These are significant changes. The system hasn't changed for 20 years. This is going to be a difficult public consultation for us to do. But we've got a good plan, we think, or at least we're working on a good plan in order to do it. Also, the solution is in development. As far as the demand zone, the demand software, we're hoping that doesn't necessarily become an issue. The second bullet, and probably more important that I want to spend with, is no matter what changes we make, some of our customers are going to be disenfranchised. They are no longer going to be able to use transit the way that they previously used it, and sometimes they may not be able to use transit at all. In order to get to or from work or however they saw it. That isn't because we're designing them out of the system. That's just because they've built their lives around the way that the transit system is structured now. That doesn't mean that's not worthwhile to change the network and to make these changes, but that's going to occur. We want to try to minimize that as much as possible. That's why we're going to do the engagement. The other thing is we're not going to get this right in September. Sorry, could I get the next slide, please? I'm getting ahead of myself. I've covered most of this stuff. I'll take the next slide, please. Okay, so again, we recommend the proposed final network design, a public consultation results be presented. I won't read all that. The big note that I want to say is this is kicking off in September of 2021, but that doesn't mean that's when the end product is going to happen. That's going to be when the big change happens, and we're going to get some things wrong, and we're going to not have it perfect at the first time, especially considering the system hasn't changed hardly any in the last 20 years. What we're anticipating is every 4 months afterwards to make incremental improvements, sometimes big, sometimes little, based upon that system, and keep on growing it forward until we get there. And we just want to be realistic about that. Can I get the next slide, please? And that's it. I burned through those slides fairly quickly. I hope I left enough time for questions for you guys.
Hopefully you didn't used to drive your bus as quickly as you go through slides.
The joke was when I was a bus driver that they promoted me in the interest of public safety.
Okay. Maybe it's good that you took political science then. Are there any questions from any members of the committee? Any hand up? So I'm assuming the September date is the tie-in with University and College coming back to have it ready for when the post-secondary are back on. That's why you've set that date, or was that picked for a different reason that I'm not seeing?
That's part of it. The big reason why I'm set on it, it may not be the date that I would normally have picked, but we've already got a lot of work. But that's the date that council asked us to do back when we were directed to do this.
Okay, Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Sorry, I popped back in a little late, so if I missed this, just to follow up with Councillor Croson's question, is it possible to get it online sooner so that we've at least run the system prior to students coming back in September?
Well, we're anticipating getting it done a few days before, in order to let that happen. But something would be I think that I can say right now that we're on track to be on that September date, and it is down to the 2nd in order to get everything done in that amount of time. So pushing it any more forward probably would result in us having a smaller public engagement period. That would be really the only way that we could do it. The technical work just takes time.
Okay. I'm just wanting to make sure that the moment we flip the switch and go live, we're able to accommodate the immediate influx of students that hopefully we'll have back here in September. With COVID, there might be a slight delay. I know January 1 for sure, things will be back, should be back to normal at universities, or post-secondary institutions. So just a concern about making sure that it's working the way it's supposed to when students come back. But if you've given that reassurance, that's good for me. Thank you.
Sorry, just one addition on that. Not that I wouldn't like to have a couple of weeks on it. Believe me, I would. But we just need to have contingency plans for it not working properly when it starts, and have enough boots on the ground. And again, I've been through this a number of times before, and we have to anticipate that the plan's not going to work perfectly, and just be ready to react.
I know both Tara.
I'm sorry, I was just going to then do a follow-up on that, and I'm sorry if I missed it in your presentation. Given that we've got the 3 post-secondary institutions here, University of Lethbridge, Lethbridge College, and Red Crow College, are we doing any targeted messaging on how the system works, especially if we have folks using the I want to say the one card, that's the University of Alberta.
Breeze card.
Okay.
Breeze card, yeah.
Yeah, very difficult, especially, and again, these are conversations that we've had. Forgive me, I've also only been here 3 months, but I do come from Ann Arbor, which is a huge university town, And it was always really, really difficult to, not that we don't need to make that effort, but they're getting so inundated with information on that first week that the nuance of what bus to catch where and everything. The key is in making, and where BusLink is going to win is that it's intuitive, right? And that's what we want to do, is create an intuitive system so that they don't have to put a lot of effort into figuring it out, that they can just walk out and catch the bus and figure out where they're going, and that our drivers are able to instruct them, and that they can be lazy because they're college kids, and that we understand that and we take care of it. So
okay, something
I'm not trying to disenfranchise any college kids, so I take that last statement back.
No, something simple enough for an elected official to use. So I get it. Thank you.
I would never say that.
Because I know we have Tara and Nick with us in this presentation, but Communications Department and Transit will work together to make sure this all rolls out with a good communication plan.
Absolutely.
You betcha, yeah. We've been connected through the whole thing. Those transit guys got lots going on. We got to be on it. Keep up with them.
All right. Look forward to seeing what it is when that all comes out. And the other thing, Mr. Sanderson, you've been here since December, so you've experienced the wind and it hasn't made you want to leave yet?
I'll tell you, I mean, I'm from Winnipeg, and it's windy in Winnipeg. And I used to say to everybody that it was windy in Winnipeg, but it is. I know why the team is now called the Hurricanes, and that's an understatement.
And why we call it the freeze guard, because when it's windy, take transit.
Yes, yes.
Are there any questions from any members of the committee before we
No,
sort of wrap?
Just a thank you to Tim and his team for pulling this together and helping move it ahead. I mean, there's been some issues with transit that we know need to be rectified. So thank you for doing this deep dive into the system and moving it forward.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, and congratulations and welcome to the city of Lethbridge.
And then when Doug installs those electric lines in the middle of the asphalt, you can have electric buses that drive over, electromagnetic roads. Right, Doug?
Already got them in Tel Aviv. It's there. It's there.
Yeah,
I don't know what he's talking about.
All right. So these three presentations, your introduction and these two are for information. But I think we'll do the same as we did with the public engagement from the River Valley and just put it into the update for council so that they know to expect more in June.
Yes.
So that we can updated on this as well, just to, again, close a couple of those loops for the rest of our colleagues. If everybody's okay with that, Councillor Parker, we're back to you on the schedule. Are you okay with making that motion?
I don't mind at all. Thank you.
All right. So I guess everybody's in favor for the motion? Thank you. All right. So that will cover those. We'll do an omnibus and do 4.5, 4.4 to 4.6 as one motion, Mr. Westerson, if it works.
Thank you.
Very
We'll
good.
take care of that right now.
Thank you.
What a taskmaster you are. You pushed through those last 4 things in 40 minutes, 43 minutes.
I had a 4:30.
Just follow the schedule.
Jeez.
I wasn't here for 2 of them.
Oh, that's probably why.
Just remember, our April 1st meeting is the Thursday before a long weekend for staff, so we'll have to make sure we don't go over on that one either, because staff will be upset if we go into their long weekend.
Perhaps we shouldn't have 16 things on the agenda then.
We got them through them all. What are you worried about? All right. Well,
Great job.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Thank you, Mr. Adair. Again, nice to meet you, Mr. Sanderson. And we are adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Tara and Nick.
Be safe. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody.